of that, but it's an option, and the people are not aware about that. Like they are not aware that they are using services that can track it you, or I think that we need to start to educate people to understand the situation, understand the problems, and with that maybe all the community can help to push that these open hardware open things, because it's important and the people are not aware about that.
So on the topic of pushing open hardware forward, what I'm just curious to hear what you guys think about like what these two questions. What are the easy wins? Like what things that aren't open yet, like Risk 5, for example, is getting there. But is there any other example of something that should be easy to open up and would be really useful? And then also, is there something that's just really important that we have open? For instance, I know like open, is it BSM or BDM or something like that, which is like a SIM card. Like there's no open SIM card, for example. So yeah, those are the two questions. Like, what's the easy win that we should open up, and is there something that's really important that needs to be opened? It is a hard question. It sounds so easy, right?
I don't really know in depth the state of the art of open hardware, so I'm maybe not the best person to answer that. But maybe we should push for open FPGAs and powerful FPGAs, so you can program it and you don't have like these enclosed processors that only two manufacturers can provide to us. Like we only have like Intel and AMD for like uh, CPU, for example. So yeah, I mean, open hardware has its limits. I mean, I don't think that anything can be open like or manufactured in an open hardware way right now, because you need too much resources to go this way. So, but yeah, I mean, this would be one option.
Just on that, in saying that it is quite difficult to to have open source hardware. A lot of resources are required. Same with the circuit layout tools. Is the one that I'm aware of, and that license is quite expensive. I think it's an annual license or a per seat license, dongle hardware locked. So you have this restriction of like small players wanting to, who maybe are embedded systems engineers or electronic designers, would have a hard time just getting started to make some hardware. So yeah, lowering the entry barrier could be another way to sort of help with that. And in terms of unlocking something, I know when I install Ubuntu on different hardware, it's often the Broadcom chip and the NVIDIA chip are the two that says, oh, these use proprietary drivers, are you sure? And you've got to actively enable it. And the annoying part with the NVIDIA one is that every time you do an update, it has to temporarily, in inverted commas, temporarily disable your proprietary drivers. So it turns off your NVIDIA. So then your GUI doesn't load up. So you're back to a terminal and have to manually find a way. And the first time that bit me, I didn't upgrade and then I lost my UI. I had to just find the way to figure out what had happened and then to bring it back. But they're the two ones I see that I don't know if they're either quick wins or just important, but the network, the Broadcom chip would be a nice one, and then the graphics chip as well.
Yeah, on a kind of related note, I know that debugging hardware for people in industry is insanely expensive, or unless you like buy cheap, unreliable stuff, and that's due to licensing. That's due to the hardware. Like it's quite complex, and it has all these like basically keys from different manufacturers to work on hardware, and also I don't know whether this is an issue. I don't know whether hardware interfaces, are they licensed? Are they open? Are does anybody own that IP? If they aren't open, then that would be a problem. If the interfaces that like are that connect our hardware together aren't open, then yeah, we're stuck.
Jeff, did you have anything on the hardware side you wanted to talk about? Or you can jump up here? No. Okay. In terms of interfacing with the hardware, I think having the standards there, like there's often certain byte codes and certain chip things are sort of reserved and they don't tell you what they do. Opening some of that up might be helpful because they could be debugging codes or pins on actually at the hardware level that could be helpful for a debugger. But if you haven't paid for the certification, then maybe you don't get access to those. But yeah, did you have something on this?
I was hearing and to Griff a question about the quick wins, and maybe it's not a quick, neither an easy, but I have somehow clear what could open the path to this one, that we need a Richard Stallman of hardware. Really, a Richard Stallman of hardware. It's the open source movement in some degree appears because in many parts of the world you can't patent software, but you can patent hardware. And then the greed of the human being started to make it closed, and almost all the hardware is closed. That's why I was joking, and maybe not too much joking, about that we need, as that quick win, a Richard Stallman of hardware. And maybe we, as people that are coming from the software, well, open source software, and there is some people that has gathered some resource, we can start to fund this open hardware system with no patents, just as a gift for humanity, like open source software is. Because otherwise, the human greed is going to play its role like it's playing now. Because as long as you have it patented, then no one can check how you build that chip, that whatever. I don't really know. This shitty game started. So maybe it would make sense to start funding or supporting projects that wants to build high technology. I mean, and it's not easy. It's a lot of resources. But for example, look, this guy Jihan Bu from Bitmain, he was not coming from any big company or patented, and he managed to do quite good hardware that I guess is patented too. But I mean, maybe it's not that difficult because now we have sources of information, universities collaborate, and it's just to light that spark of people being worried about the open hardware, that anyone can see what's going on there, can use it for their own designs of all kind of devices, not only computers, but also sensors, IoT devices, and so on, without having that umbrella of a patent.
Actually, just on that, to tie a few points together, maybe having some incentive model like around that if you are creating hardware that more people are using, that more people are able to add on to, then that almost becomes a reward in some way. Maybe that adds to your reputation and your ability to vote on things in a broader level. Yeah, that could be quite interesting.
I don't know. It's just a feeling. Just looking in human behavior. At the end of the day, everything goes to human behavior and economics. And well, software in Europe, for example, you can't patent software. So it's a very good field to open source software. You can't patent it, and you have some concern for freedom and so on. You build open source software. But with the hardware, that's not happening. Or I don't really know if that's happening. Maybe I'm not maybe I'm confused, I'm wrong about it. But I would really like to see these initiatives of open hardware, like that you can just like makers in fab labs and so on, build your own computers with pieces that you can trust on, maybe having also their own identities and chips that form a higher identity that makes a CPU a whole computer, but that you can trust it.
Yeah, just on yeah, like to almost counter argue against why maybe open source hardware is hard is because there is an initial investment often required. So the person who invests maybe wants some protection of that, a bit like medical research or research into pharmaceuticals, trademarks, and like people who invest in it need to protect those returns. But maybe that our iteration cycle has gotten cheaper and smaller. Maybe it's time to shed that old layer and move on to something where we can just start with rapid prototyping and open it up. Yeah, that's a good idea. And I guess maybe a crowd-funded model, like a Kickstarter project. We're seeing more of those. And the other application I was thinking of was a Raspberry Pi computer around the goal there was to onboard programmers. So in a way, it was a software need that encouraged this hardware to be created. We said we need to teach programming in schools. We need some cheaper, more affordable hardware. And so the Raspberry Pi was born. I'm not sure how much the schematics are open source there, but at least it's... But at least, yeah, there's more pressure on them to do that. But yeah. Not sure. Do you have more on that topic around that?
I jump in just to put the fucking patterns of the in the table. That's the let's fuck off patterns.
Well, what you said, I mean, Richard Stallman tries to use like open hardware and so on, but even nowadays, it's hard to replace the BIOS of the computers with open like LibreBoot and initiatives like that. So yeah, we are really far away from having like our really decentralized and open hardware, but we have to push for it. That's it.
Griff's not here to give us our third topic. Oh, did you want to?
I was just going crazy. Just maybe just like applying a model like NumRI for data scientists to try to get in, like you were saying, to find a way to incentivize people to build this kind of hardware in an open source fashion. Maybe that's the key. Like if it's a matter of human behavior, we all know how powerful is this technology to shape human behavior. So maybe you made a good point to set the path to go this way.
I think we've been around that topic a bit now.
Well, you had another topic, right? Okay, cool.
Trust in hardware. So I think the whole discussion has been around the trust in our hardware.
Can I ask to clarify the definition of trust in this sense?
To clarify how I mean know what is doing your chip. Not maybe not you, that you might not have the technical knowledge, but like in a software that I don't really know how that node works, but it's open source. I know that there can be thousands of eyes looking at it to see if there is something strange, and I want to know. I want to have that trust that everybody and people that knows can dive in it. How is it made? How it works? If it can be tampered with or has any mechanism to protect any attack to tamper or to alter the normal functioning of a BIOS, of a CPU, of a RAM even. I don't really know what would be the most important part, but maybe, for example, I guess the BIOS would be a good point to start. And you were talking about some initiatives that open source BIOS.
They do exist, but yeah, it's just an example. I mean, we used to say like don't trust, verify, but usually people just want to build things, not verify stuff. It's really like probably a boring thing to do, and yeah, we really need more eyes to put not only in software, in smart contracts and all the stuff, but also in the very first layer, which is the hardware.
I mean, it sounds like a certification agency would be really useful, right? Like if you had some kind of open source or, agency that's focused on auditing these open projects. But then for hardware, it's just so hard because even if you do open source the hardware, how do you know the hardware you have is actually matching the hardware that you think it is? I mean, that seems pretty impossible. Take a seat.
Just kind of talking about what you were talking about before. Sure, some people might be able to kind of verify the code and actually, say, hey, this is in line with schematics or whatever. But in reality, there is only a handful of people who can do that. And like, how do we educate people and make them care about this stuff? How do we get them to like actually understand the significance of what open source hardware could be for them? Because they're never going to understand, and quite frankly, they probably shouldn't, because they're out doing the things we don't want to be doing. Like we're doing the things we want to do. So yeah, I think that's kind of the biggest problem with open source in general, but specifically hardware. And then, like you were saying, how do we actually get people to be able to confirm that these are those things?
Yeah, I mean, like, I don't know. Oh, that's not fair. Well, but I'll pretend. I don't really know how the plumbing works in my toilet. I don't need to. I'm just going to trust when I flush that my shit's going to go away, right? And, like, with open hardware, I feel like, and everything else we use, I feel like it's the same thing, right? You you can't get stuck in all the minutia of like what you're doing. Otherwise, we can't build off of it. So there's got to be, some kind of protection above, and that's how we generally do things. Like, how do I know this fruit was organic, right? Oh, well, USDA organic. Unfortunately, these certification agencies suck too, right? So we need to. We'll see how these things evolve, and I'm hoping that we're building new systems that can incentivize solutions. I mean, this is the magic of blockchain. We're at a blockchain conference. I mean, it should be worth mentioning that you can create money to incentivize things happening. This is a model I'm really excited about pushing for Giveth. Is just this where you create a token that's basically a Ponzi scheme, a shitcoin, right? Where money goes in. I mean, look how popular FOMO 3D and all these Ponzi schemes are. What if when money comes in, you're buying tokens, right? And then as more people buy, the price gets more expensive for the tokens. So the money stays in this contract, and then when people buy tokens, though, there's like a 6-month waiting period. Like, it's a bonded token, so they have to wait for a period of time before they can sell it back. But then also when they send money in, tokens are created over here to incentivize some kind of tragedy of the commons. So for in this case, it would be auditing open source hardware, right? So you have this, anyone who wants to basically do a philanthropic investment, they would send money into the smart contract. They would buy tokens that then those tokens, maybe they send 1 Ether and they get 1,000 tokens, right? But also 200 tokens are created over here for a community to decide what projects to fund with that money. The tokens that I buy with my Ether, I can't sell them back for 6 months, but the tokens that are sent to this decentralized altruistic community, they can actually be spent right away. And so there's a buy curve and a sell curve on this thing. And to decide how those 200 tokens are spent, I can stake my tokens and take part in that decision-making process, or delegate my stake to someone else, right? And so here we have a creation of, can create currency that incentivizes or is built to incentivize a problem, which in this case is like open hardware. And I mean, this is very similar to what fiat currency does. They actually create money to incentivize people to loan money to keep the economy going. And I mean, banks wouldn't just loan money to people. It's a really scary thing to do. But when they loan it, they get to create it out of nothing. And this is the same issue that we have in a lot of these tragedy of the commons. We don't have a good reason to just throw money away at an altruistic cause. But if we can create a currency around it that incentivizes that, then it makes it reasonable. You're creating money out of nothing and giving it to this thing. And just like the banks, you get to take part in which small businesses, or in this case, which open hardware auditing firms you want to support. So I don't know. That's one route to solve some of these things, but I'm sure there's other foundations and other projects that are going about it too. Do you guys know of any supporting systems for open hardware?
Like, you mean tied somehow with cryptocurrencies, or just? Well, I mean, I know some, but there are some initiatives, but I'm not really digging into it, because at the end, when you work with blockchain or with that node, for example, the requirements you have are so high that you cannot even think about open hardware, because open hardware, maybe it's feasible for hardware wallets or simple computations, but at the level that the requirements we have nowadays, it's so far away, so it's not even that way to, I mean, you can find some stuff, but it's not really covering all the needs you have, maybe.
I got to go to a CC Summit just because it was held in our city, and so it was awesome. And there was one talk on open source hardware. I'm trying to find, it was someone from one of these associations for open source hardware of some kind. And it was pretty grim. He was very realistic, and gave like the true perspective of kind of what it looks like right now. But it wasn't necessarily like you're talking about trying to potentially create incentives to do these things, but more just collectively organizing and trying to create maybe standards and things like that, which is still great and very important. But I think what you're talking about is kind of upping it to a next level, and something unheard of, I think, in that community.
Well, for something like that to work, we need those guys that are already doing it, right? Like, it's like, okay, yeah, we'll just put the money there and maybe it'll work out, and it won't, right? You got to find the people who are actually knowledgeable and have tried some things and failed. And so, like, yeah, dude, I would love that. Would be amazing. And also, this is an open panel, so if anyone wants to come down and take a seat, you're more than welcome to. And then one of us will get up. But yeah, do you have anything to say? Well, I can talk about the importance of DApp node, for instance, because I think we went down straight to the root layer, and it's really hard to. We're not going to solve that in anytime soon. Connecting open hardware to open designs is a really difficult problem. Not to mention just like finding manufacturers who would manufacture these things, but at the same time, at least we can start owning our own hardware and putting it in our house. I think one of the things that we see in Ethereum that we don't really realize is that Etherscan has the hardware that we are all constantly pinging to look up our addresses, right? I guarantee Etherscan knows what your Ethereum addresses are. They do, because you're pinging their server for like this address, that address, that address. They're tracking that, right? And so like, who's doing Monero, right? Who owns the Monero block explorer? I don't know, right? But I bet they know I bet they know your IP address and can connect IP addresses to Monero addresses. And if you don't have your own hardware, then you don't have your privacy in this crypto space as much as we like to dream. So with a solution like DApp node, I think is really important, where you can have some sovereignty over your requests to the network. And Block Scout is an open source Ethereum block explorer. So you could actually run that on a DApp node in your because Etherscan's closed source as well. So, but with Block Scout, you could run that on your DApp node, and you could be pinging your DApp node, and no one besides you would be able to see what addresses you use. And even better, you can share your hardware, kind of like Infura. You can be your own Infura for your friends and family, so that when they're pinging, they can use your Block Scout, and you can be Etherscan, and they know who they're divulging their information to. And they probably are like, this guy doesn't have the... Like, you also lower the economics of scale for it to be useful for him to ping and try to, de-anonymize what you're doing. He's not... If your brother is the admin geek that's running your DApp node, does he care what addresses you have? Like, does he have the ability to even figure that out? I guarantee Etherscan does, because they have huge investors. But, every little DApp node runner... it doesn't make sense for them to do it. So I just hope that we can, start with the little bites, of like, okay, let's just have people start running our server. DApp node's doing that. I'm curious if there's any other little bites that are like that, that I'm missing, because I don't know, right? I mean, I see DApp node doing their things, but maybe there's other hardware that we need to decentralize. Do you guys have any ideas?
Yeah, I think we should make a difference, because DAppNode is not really about hardware itself, it's about the infrastructure. And of course we have to attack this surface, like open hardware, or decentralized manufacturing, and all the stuff, but with DAppNode we cannot really reach this level. We need to decentralize infrastructure, and even if you are not using Monero, you are using Ethereum, I think you need some level of privacy in any way. So you are not publishing your access timing and IPs and so on, or even accounts. So yeah, I think that privacy should be there by default, and DAppNode is a way to achieve that, because that's the way to have like domestic nodes that do the job to access the centralized net. So
Yeah, just on that, was thinking about this this hardware project where it's a bit like Alexa in the home and it's voice activated, but it doesn't share your data with the cloud. I think it was doing voice recognition control of things in your house, but again, no data of your house was going to a centralized server. This was, I think it's SNIPS or something in France, and yeah, that I think that's just something that would be useful, where we can use the tool and know that the data is not being sold, not being used to identify us, but still get the same kind of usability as a product. So maybe if people have something like a box they put in their house, they don't have to care what it is, they don't have to care that it's open, but they just know that their data is protected, and they just look for that logo and they go, that's the one that protects my data, versus Google Alexa, which they know might not.
yeah, maybe another point of view would be like not only the privacy, but also the resilience to access content without censorship. So when the infrastructure is decentralized and you own your own node and you access these decentralized servers in this way, this is also a way to fight censorship. That yeah, we felt like the control over the content we can access can be threatened many times, and this is another value that DAppNode can add.
Yeah. I really think that when we are doing these like open source solutions, we're raising the standard of living and access for everybody. You know, I feel like that's like the root of what happens. Like this microphone, I doubt this is open source, right? Like if I want to build a microphone, or you know, how do I do that? You know, I mean, obviously I can't build it, but if somebody wanted to build a microphone, you know,
The schematics of a microphone are probably one of the easiest things to build. So maybe it's not the best example, but yeah, I know what you mean. Like everything, it's closed source around. So yeah,
Even expanding on that, I was going to say start with the same thing, to say even like a microphone like this, which is perhaps quite sophisticated, would have some schematic representing this online. But if you tried to build that yourself, good luck in getting the quality like that. So that's always the devil is in the detail. You might have a schematic, and you might try to reproduce that. But if you lay out the hardware a certain way, you'll get resonances, or you'll get more interference based on something that's highly optimized, packaged, and sold as is. And that's their secret sauce, and that's why things remain closed, because someone has invested and they want to protect that and keep the entry barrier there for others. Yeah, it's just around incentivizing, lowering the entry barriers. That's probably something we can try to do.
The name of the group was the Open Source Hardware Association. Yeah, and they were really legit, really cool people.
very cool. Hey, thanks, man. Does anyone else have any topics they want to cover?
yeah. About decentralizing hardware, maybe we should think about simplifying things, because right now DAppNode, for example, cannot run in a Raspberry Pi. So a Raspberry Pi would be an example of something that can be completely open source and cheap and replicable and so on. But now we are going next step forward. Like we have these things, these boxes that look like PCs that you can even use for desktop use, and they are really powerful, but they are really hard to be decentralized. So we need to attack that vector of making everything less computing. Yeah,
Yeah, and that might come down to the products and the use cases, where people would have to be, having a real strong need or desire to use it. And unfortunately, I have my doubts in society caring so much for privacy. Like they hear about the Facebook data breach, they still want to use Facebook because there's something pulling them there, whether it's this sort of addiction of the like button or whatever. But yeah.
I mean, I just honestly don't believe that any of our like the privacy concerns will ever come from a Facebook type use case, and it'll be things like voting in countries where countries where you're going to be killed for voting for someone. Like the only reason I think about these things is because Elizabeth is working on some ring signature research, and people constantly bring up like basically, oh, so I can use this to buy drugs or to send anonymous transactions. So what? And it's I think really important that we kind of break that stigma towards privacy, and it's not about kind of anonymizing myself, but anonymizing just what I'm doing. And again, not me, but people who will be killed if they act in a certain way. And that's what really excites me is that like it won't come from Europe, it won't come from North America. It's going to come from somewhere where we like maybe don't ever expect it.
Well, let me just say that we have a lot of interesting talks. We have a talk on anonymous voting. It's I think the second to last talk of the event here. So I hope that you guys will tell us what's going on. And then we also have ZK knowledge. Oh, hey, there it is. Yeah, so that's at 6 o'clock on Wednesday. And then Jordy is going to teach people how to build our own zero knowledge proof circuits so that you can actually like create a circuit to anonymize a voting or anonymize anything, right? So beyond just like the simple circuit that's used for Zcash, right? So it's like the puzzle pieces for that, which will be really interesting. And then the other one today in about an hour after the next topic is open discussion on governance, but then the one after that is transparency versus privacy. And it'll be a very interesting debate because it's a very interesting topic when we are in a pseudonymous environment. You know, when do we want things to be transparent and open and public, and when do we want things to be private? I don't know, you know? So I hope that you guys will stick around for some of these talks. Sure. Well, cool. Any other topics on decentralized hardware that we want to cover? No? What other hardware do we need to decentralize? You were saying the FPG. FPGA. What is an FPGA?
Well, I'll just start off. Field programmable gate array, but it's something that rather than like I haven't had to program one myself, but I was working alongside a colleague who was coding the microcontroller that I was writing embedded C for. So I said, oh, I need an extra output pin for this. He changes the FPGA, gives me an extra output pin. So on the fly, changing the hardware, and then that becomes baked into the gate array. And then once that's set, I then can code that as a micro. So basically, I can say I want a new piece of silicon almost. It's kind of to that degree, if you want to.
Yeah, I think this is a field of research in mining also, but I'm not really into it. But yeah, I would like to know if there is some field programmable initiative, open source and so on.
I was just going to say, specific to mining, I guess in that case, you would get, like you'd buy a large piece of hardware that can be configured, and then inside that code a whole bunch of SHA-solving chips. And then you just put them all in there. It's one piece of hardware, you've already bought it, and you just need to burn a few of them with many of these hashing chips. And then you run them all in parallel. That's the other thing. It runs in. It's a lot. It leverages parallel programming, parallel, I guess, processing at the electronic level, such that you can do them all in parallel. So it's very cool, and it's somehow having that more accessible. It's again going to the engineering tools and making the tools accessible is sort of a nice place to be.
Very cool. I have to go find the group that's doing this next one. Yeah, I don't suppose you could tell us more about DAppNode, like just in general, because we're out of topics. So.
Okay, general. Well, related to this last topic about other things that we need to open is, I think we need to start to think about Wi-Fi connection, routers, gateway, switch. I mean, the next step is move to mesh network or something like that. Try to avoid the centralized ISPs. And for that, we need to start to think about our connection. And our connection right now, we are using access points that are property of, I don't know, Cisco or other providers, and that is another paint portfolio. So I think,
Have you heard of OpenWRT? And what are your thoughts on that?
yeah, that is the thing that we need to start to think. Yeah, but that is the point. It's the software, and right now we need to cover with open hardware because okay, the software is fine, but what happens if in the hardware you have some kind of sniffer of your connections? You have the same problem at the end.
Just to bring it to the sort of the sniffer and problems around that, like you're saying about trust, and it would be good to know what exploits are possible or what things are tamperable or hackable. But doesn't matter if sort of encryption is happening at a higher level or if hardware, if signing of transactions or whatever is happening on a lower level. If we're protected from that, if the software and the hardware can work together and be protected from that, it doesn't matter about the hardware if it's doing what we want.
Yeah, well, it's fun because if you think about projects like Zcash, that they need to make awesome trusted setups because if you really want to be sure that it's a trusted setup, it's very 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 hard because it's impossible today to be sure that everything is fine. And it's not only the software, it's the hardware because you have maybe a good software, but you cannot uh, be sure that the hardware is fine. And this to create that kind of proof, it's very 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 hard, and that's a problem. And I think it's very hard to resolve right now because we expect a good quality and have some kind of good materials. And the problem is that this good technology is protected by patents or other kind of things, and it's hard to find an alternative in a trusted or open way. And I think they are giving a lot of money to investigate and develop these routers and thing, and they have the power. I mean, it's you can understand like the banks. They have the power, but they have the hardware power, and it's gonna be very hard to remove that power.
I think tomorrow we're going to do a mesh networks workshop, and yeah, I mean, I've been involved in mesh networks and Giveth in Catalonia, and I would say that it's one of the fields that it's actually improving a lot in this regards of open the hardware using LibreMesh and other open software, and yeah, and I think it's one of the fields that you can actually act in the hardware level because it's not like intensive computing stuff, and there is still some space to act.
Yeah, I was just curious if you heard of the Libre Router project because it's basically it's I think an organization from South America, Argentina, where they started to design and build their own routers and all the specs and all the hardware plans, I guess, are fully open source. They made a crowdfunding project, and I think they created about 2,000 pieces, and well, anyone is basically free to rebuild the same router, and it comes pre-installed with LibreMesh, the mesh software he just talked about. And I think this is a first step to not only have open source software like OpenWRT on the routers, but as well hardware which perfectly is compatible with the mesh stuff and the OpenWRT.
Yeah, one thing that is important to know that is to realize the problem. I mean, is if we are go harder, we start to realize of all the problems, and we start to stop using that kind of technology. We need to stop using everything. So we need to have this aware of the problems and try to resolve and create that kind of projects and start to get that power from companies. And we know that, for example, the dynamic DNS that we have in the DAMNet is a centralized solution, but right now it's not possible to find another solution. So okay, we know the problem. We start to try to solving to try solution for that, and it's the same case in the open hardware. Right now, I think the people are starting to be aware of the problem, of the consequences of using that kind of technology that is closed. But it's not possible from one day to another day start to using open and trusted things. So let's start for the basic thing. Let's make better tools and open source tools. I hope that at the end the balance get equilibrium for private things and open things. For me, it's at least my point.
So thank you guys. We're gonna move to the next topic, which is decentralized governance. And I hope that maybe Jordy and Flurkle and someone else who wants to, and if you guys want to talk governance, you can. But we need 4 volunteers to take a seat. Yeah. So this discussion is going to be about, it's an open discussion on governance. There's a lot of stuff going on in Ethereum. Lane's going to come here in a second and maybe also bring something to this discussion. But if anyone else wants to take a seat, we got 2 seats open. Does anyone else want to sit down on this? Oh, here we go. This guy's always down. At first he was hesitant, but now, oh yeah, he's feeling it. Yeah. So I'm curious, what are you guys' thoughts on governance in general, and how do we improve it? Maybe Lane can introduce.
I think Lane's going to do a better job on that. So
What am I introducing? We're starting early. This is this doesn't usually happen. Hey guys. Hey. Yeah, so governance. How about it? You guys excited about this topic as I am? So my understanding of the format is that we're in a fishbowl, we being the 5 of us. Is it 5 seats? Yeah, you want to explain again?
Yeah. So the way this fishbowl works is really fun. So Kiki just sat down, so now someone else has to get up. Oh, no. Okay. So there's always one open seat, and so it's like a musical chair game, right? And anyone who's sitting out here, if you have a question, you just come and sit down right there. And then, you know, it's okay if there's 5 people there for a minute or whatever. Somebody will get antsy and leave. You don't have to worry about it, right? But yeah, then the conversation just happens, and you know, you guys should be talking to each other and forget about the crowd. So, but this is just an open discussion, and Lane, you can take it away and give us something to discuss about.
Thank you, Griff. And just one tiny clarification. There's no order. It's not like the last person, like the first person, the person who's been up here the longest has to leave. Okay, cool. So it's more spontaneous than that. Awesome. Hi, I'm Lane, and I am not here to talk. I'm here to steward a conversation about a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and I'm sure to many of you as well, and that topic is governance, and more specifically, decentralized governance. I'll just give you guys 30 seconds of kind of why this matters to me, and then we'll just kind of kick off with questions and conversation, open dialogue. I'm relatively new to the Ethereum and blockchain and decentralization world in general. I've been doing this for about a year now, and I noticed about a year ago that topics like scaling get a lot of attention, and a year ago, governance wasn't getting a lot of attention. I think that's changed recently. But I do think that one of the biggest crises or challenges or opportunities, depending how you frame it, right, that's facing us as a community today is governance. And more specifically, you know, I think we have to appreciate that blockchain in general, and Bitcoin specifically, and I think to a large extent Ethereum as well, was created, in direct response to perceived failures of governance in meat space. There's a reason that Bitcoin emerged in 2008, 2009. There's a reason that
the genesis block of Bitcoin refers to bank collapse. And anyway, yeah, so this is my motivation for being here. I think that for me, Ethereum is a tool to make the world a better place and replace some of the aging governance structures that we have in the real world. So that's my motivation for being here. I would love, do you guys mind if you guys each share your motivation, why governance matters to you? Oh, one quick thing. In the spirit of true decentralization, I actually have to pop out for something in about 20 minutes. So like, that doesn't matter because this is decentralized, right? So when that happens, don't freak out. I'll come right back, but someone else takes my spot. Yeah.
I don't agree with that. You should stay. Yeah, awesome. What I think about governance, what I don't get is why we create all this technology to make sure we don't make the same mistakes, but then try to use this technology to do the same kind of stuff all over again. Like talk about where should we all go, but there is no all, right? There is no, the whole point is like you're responsible for your value individually. And so in my belief, like when you don't have like shared value, there's no need for governance. So to me, the whole governance debate is actually, I feel it's like a lot of air, a lot of talk, but in the end, it won't matter.
My interest is in knowing exactly what the problem is we're trying to solve. Because governance for governance is stupid, and it just gets a lot of people a job, and they're all happy and just doing their thing, getting paid, and they think they're doing something very useful. But we first have to be really sure, like, what are we trying to solve, and then find the best way with the least shitty things.
Yeah, for me, sometimes we say that this technology is going to change the world, and we are very happy because we are saying, oh, this is fantastic technology, and this is really going to change the world. But why we say that this is going really to change the world, and why this is a different technology that differentiates with other important technologies that happened in the past? Mainly is because governance. Because at the end, governance is it just rules the relationship between humans. Okay, so the humans, if we were alone, we will not have governance. But we are in a society. We live together. We create groups, we create associations, we try to do the things together. And if we understand governance as taking decisions in a community form, in a decentralized form, as a community, as a member, as a single entity, then here is the importance. And here is where the technology can add a lot of value to these human relationships. So that's why mainly my main interest, and that's why I think this is an important, if not the most important topic in the space.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that thought, Jordi, and thanks everyone for sharing your motivation as well. Just to add a tiny thought to that, that was the first thing I realized when I joined this beautiful decentralized Web3 Ethereum blockchain space, right, is that we have this amazing technology, and that's natural because we're technologists, right, and technologists build shit because it's cool. We don't always think through the sort of social implications of it, but what is it for, right? This is like called the deep why question, like why are we all here? This is exactly the question you asked. We make a lot of noise about changing the world. How are we going to do that? I mean, I think governance is the answer, or one possible answer. Just a reminder, like, this is an open seat, so any of you guys, like, come anytime. We should mix things up, make this fun.
Here, when we talk about governance, for me there is like two steps in governance. There is one part that's more social, that's not technological. At the end, humans, we have been living together for many years before even computers were invented, and governance is still there. So there is one part that's deciding how we rule or together, okay? And this is a social part. This is part of the human part, and this is very much to the sociologist. What the technology adds is that right now we can set up whatever rules or whatever rules that manage these entities, or even these new kind of entities, these new kind of relationships between people around the globe. And this technology, what allows is that we can enforce, we have the tool to really use, really ensure these rules that we are defining. The problem of a governance is that if you define the rules, but then nobody is believing you that the people is following the rules because the people can cheat the rules, or the people is don't have this really consensus, and the people don't trust the system. That's problematic. And then a governance that could be very good from the design perspective, maybe it's not doable because you need maybe a central party that enforces that, and then you need to trust the central party and all that stuff. And in blockchain, with this technology, we can really use this technology to really enforce, to really convince the people that the rules that we define and that we all agree are really the ones that are enforcing. And this opens a lot of systems that were not practical before this technology appears. Right now starts appearing new governance models that were maybe from the theoretical perspective good, but not practical on that side. So this is probably one thing that this technology is going to add in the governance side. No, if people will sweat.
Yeah. So I mean, one way of looking at I completely lost my train of thought. One way of looking at blockchain governance is maybe that it makes possible things that were not possible before. Hi, Adrian. How are you? What do you think about this?
I just think that it doesn't have to be so binary, in the sense that, like, I'm not trying to solve the world's problems. I'm trying to solve problems, and if people want to be a part of that world, then I think we're actually going to be solving problems, because, like, we don't need to destroy everything and create new governance for everyone on the blockchain, I think, for this to make sense on kind of a global scale. But communities around the world need to start, seeing that this could be useful for them to achieve some kind of empowerment in a democratized way. Like, I think a good example is like an Uber, for example. I don't think like a decentralized Uber is going to come from someone building a DApp in North America, but I think that's going to come from some local taxi union somewhere that's in a place that needs to somehow together cooperate to beat Uber in their local market. And I think that's how I see governance in the blockchain space kind of affecting.
Yeah, so I think there's a distinction between governance in blockchain, which you're describing, and governance of blockchain. And I'm trying to get a framework in my head, like, does one depend on the other? In a sense, it does, right? Because if the blockchain is the base layer that we're using to build systems to govern humans, or even just to organize human labor, cooperation, et cetera, like the example you're giving, then it does in some sense rely on the blockchain, the governance of the blockchain. But it's an important distinction.
Totally. And I think, sorry.
Just to clarify that, so I will even distinguish, because I think there is a lot of confusion on that. One thing is, of course, is what you are governing. So you are governing maybe just an entity that has nothing to do with a blockchain. Okay, so that you are governing maybe a city or a company. Okay, and sometimes you also have to governance the decisions that you take in the same blockchain. So Ethereum, for example, they need to take decisions as a blockchain. So that's two things. Okay, and the other is this tool this tool that we use as a governance enforcement. This can be also like on chain and off chain. And this this distinguish, because sometimes the people I hear on chain block governance and off chain. What really are you meaning? Are you meaning that is a governance that is in chain? So a governance for something external that you are using an on chain an on chain tool. So I think it's important to start distinguishing these concepts because they are different.
Totally. Just to comment on what you're saying. I mean, the idea of on-chain governance, in my opinion, kind of just scares me from allowing these local communities to use this technology, to use Layer 1 as this platform to do whatever it is they need to do. Like, I understand that there's not the doesn't go great, but I mean, I personally like the way everyone handles situations, like even to the Constantinople So I mean, like, I appreciate being able to like read your write up on it on Ethereum Magicians and stuff like that, and to be able to follow along, and not necessarily to be a part of the conversation, but to be able to follow along, and it's all fully transparent, and no one's hiding anything, but also no one's forcing you to do that. That's kind of, that's you, and I like that it needs people to do those things.
So yeah, I mean, I think I'm glad you brought up this question of on-chain versus off-chain governance. I think this is one of the most important, it's like just foundational questions in this space right now, and I do think it may be worth, for everyone's benefit, like spending a few minutes talking about what it means. But just to respond to what you just said about Constantinople, this is a great example because the risk of off-chain governance, or I should say more appropriately, not having on-chain governance, is that deals get done in the back room, and it's not transparent, and it turns into a cabal. To me, there are other risks, but that's the main risk when you don't have formalized systems. And like, not everyone's comfortable with opening the windows and letting some light in. You know, like I will be very frank about this. I'm a very open person. I'm very much for transparency. I think that the Ethereum community in general, the project, the protocol, the core devs, all of it would benefit from way more transparency, because to me, that's how you get all the members of the ecosystem, all the stakeholders, to feel enfranchised. Even if, as you just said, exactly as you just said, even if they're not like necessarily actively part of the decision process, at least they can watch that process unfolding, okay? But that's not, frankly, how Ethereum has worked in the past, and it's gotten a lot of pushback, both the foundation as well as the protocol governance. So I'm trying in some tiny capacity to like bring some fresh air and some light to the process, but there's pushback. Not everyone's comfortable with that.
So earlier today we were talking a little bit about signaling, right? And I had a thought when I got up, but it's kind of left me right now. But
Okay. What was said about signaling earlier?
What were we just talking about?
Oh, on-chain versus off-chain governance. Sorry.
Right, yeah. We were talking about Telegraph, right? And the way that it would be an off-chain process, but it would be very good at signaling.
Yeah.
When we're talking about governance here, we're talking about how these changes get made, right?
Yeah.
And
so the definition of governance, sort of, is how changes get made.
how changes get made. And signaling, almost by definition, has to be off-chain. And how would you reconcile that with having to have a... Oh, right. My thought was on-chain governance has to be systemized, has to be systematic almost. How do you prevent that from being eventually gamified?
Yeah, so, wow, that's good. That should be louder. That's good. I have a loud voice. So to the second question, you can't prevent it from being gamified, which is the main criticism of on-chain governance. I think that, so Vlad has spoken very eloquently about this, and I urge you to read the things he's written, because he's explained it much more eloquently than I would be able to. But that's the general sentiment, right? That whenever you set down a system of rules, whatever those rules are, that system can be captured. Okay, and he spoke this morning specifically in the context of corporate capture. So I think that's why I go back and forth, but I'm generally in his camp, in the no on-chain governance camp, for that reason. And to the point about signals, I think signals are especially important to us because there's no on-chain governance, right? Because on-chain governance, signals are less important. I mean, the system just works, right? Just votes happen and decisions get made. But in the world that I operate in this world of, you know, all these governance things in Ethereum, we don't have good signals. And I think that signals are especially important because we don't have anything on-chain, really. And the things we do have on-chain, like coin votes, are pretty crappy. So signals are super important. So thank you to those people who are working on signals.
This is a question I've got a lot, and I'm wondering kind of your thoughts on it. When we're trying to gather these signals, many times the first worry that I get is that somehow it's going to be more influential or unfairly influence dev decisions because of some kind of weighted metric or almost like they don't really. If we are modifying the system somehow by measuring it, then we're unfairly pushing it towards one way or the other, rather than allow it to kind of go on its own.
Yeah, so I mean, part of what I'm getting, no, I think I got it. I think so. There's observer's paradox, right, which is the fact that in the simple act of observing or measuring, you are necessarily like, first of all, you're biased in what you're recording, and second of all, you're probably, the act of observing, the act of recording changes the answer, right? I mean, that's a physical property of the world. I think my response to that is, that's why we need multiple signals, right? Like and here's the other thing, right? In the absence of explicit signals, let's call them explicit signals, people in a position of governance, people making decisions, we have our own signals. We each have our own system of signals, but they're not explicit, right? So like when I'm, discussing, just to pick on the example you brought up, that, Constantinople upgrade, governance of the Ethereum protocol, the conversations I have with you guys at events like this factor in, my own understanding of the code and the limitations factor in, my reading of the community via Reddit and Twitter factor in, but those aren't necessarily better or less biased than, a system of explicit signals. We're all triangulating.
I mean, absolutely. And that's kind of what fears me, creates fear in my heart, like honestly, deep down, about
what the source of fear is, because you mentioned fear.
Yeah, I really see. So I mean, like going backwards even to things like the DAO. Like I do believe at the end of the day that the social consensus of kind of the people sitting in this room, like we define what the protocol is at the end of the day. I mean, there might not be governance, but if we needed to hard fork again, like it would be pretty clear that, there are obvious on-chain implications to it beyond just an upgrade to kind of adding new opcodes. Like we could, as a community, do whatever we wanted with this open source code. And I really like it that way. I really like how it doesn't necessarily appeal to certain entities because of the nature of how kind of speculative, not necessarily the prices, but the longevity of these chains are. Like, for example, in my local community, the price going down has been the best thing for us because we've now get to just, go to events and there isn't 200 people that are all kind of looking for the next fast coin that does fast things. And I don't know, that's my fear, is that by creating too much structure, we limit the structures people can build on top of this platform for structure. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's an important point. Let's come back to that. I'm going to pass the mic to James. The keeping the base layer as simple as possible.
You can keep going. No, it's fine. Now I'm trying to remember what it was that I was gonna say. Oh, the piece of fear of, then I feel like fear, and also the tension of we still need to get things done to upgrade the protocol. I think it's fair to say we're not finished with progress, and so I guess Ethereum in the abstract, like there's room there. If we stopped where we were today, we wouldn't get much further. And so then I feel like there's like a tension and fear in between trying to get stuff done and also trying to not get the wrong stuff done.
So we all sort of are familiar with Bitcoin governance and how it is or is not working depending on your perspective, which is to say that there are no hard forks really, except when they break things and fix them. They're not adding things really. And that this is not a normative. I'm not saying this should or shouldn't be that way, right? I mean, that maybe there's a place in the world for a super stable chain that doesn't change. Like, I'm okay with that. But I guess just going off of what you just said just now, there are people in the community who are beginning to say, especially now that like the Constantinople upgrade is delayed a little bit, that Ethereum governance is starting to look like Bitcoin governance, and maybe we're not moving fast enough. I've had interesting conversations with Casey and some other folks on my team about, hey, all this attention is focused now on Shasper and the 2.0 roadmap. Aren't there a lot of other things that we can do in the short term on the main chain to make it better? There's a whole list of technical things, EVM 1.5 stuff, parallelizing transactions, account abstraction, stateless clients, all these things, these ideas that were proposed and kind of put on the table. So yeah, just an open question to anyone here. How do you guys feel about Ethereum governance? Is it responsive? Is it moving forward, or are we like calcifying?
I mean, I think things like the Moloch DAO are moving us in the right directions of the right direction of where we should be going and the way that we allocate resources to these things. Like for whoever doesn't know, like it's a project by the Spank Chain team to basically build out a DAO that will kind of fill the role that we rely on a lot of centralized foundations right now. And like going back to 1.5, I mean, there's very clear ramifications to what happened by stopping the funding for that. Even like with Ethereum Magicians being like potentially related to that kind of.
Do you want to share a tiny bit of the backstory?
Yeah, for sure. So Ethereum, like EVM 1.5 was worked on by someone by the name of Greg Colvin, and his funding, like I don't know too much of the politics or anything, but he had issues with his funding, and from that came a group, not directly from that, but through other things, that is trying to be kind of the Ethereum subgroup of the IETF, which is the Internet Engineering Task Force. So it's like trying to create more structure to the governance without creating structure, and it just being like a working group. And that was a great thing that happened. And so maybe it's good that Ethereum didn't have governance in place, because otherwise maybe the Ethereum Magician wouldn't have occurred. You know what I mean? So I think like building again like away from the main chain, kind of, yeah, that's where the focus should be.
I think there's an interesting question, which is really sort of a philosophical or existential question, right? Which is like, what is Ethereum to you? What is it meant to be? What should it be? Which is sort of a very normative question. And this goes back to what you said a moment ago. I wanted to come back to that about keeping the base layer as simple as possible. This has come up a number of times, both in the Fellowship of Ethereum Magicians at some of the events we did, like in Berlin here a couple months ago, as well as another forum called EIP 0, which we did in Toronto, actually, back in March, I think, around ECC, EdCon, sorry. Right, and so the point that was made, which I agree with, is that you can build, like, let's say, on-chain governance on top of a system that's agnostic about governance, but the reverse is not true. Right, once you build the on-chain governance at layer 1, let's say, then everything on top of that is subject to it. And so again, the question is, if your vision for Bitcoin is to be, sorry, I'm totally jet lagged. If your vision for Ethereum is to be a true base layer protocol, a general purpose layer upon which anything can be built, then I think that there's a very strong argument to be made for not baking governance into the protocol. But other projects like Tezos feel otherwise. And this comes up a lot in the context of like funds recovery. Right, if we, obviously it's a very controversial topic, but maybe that belongs at layer 2. Maybe there's some sort of insurance DAO or contract or something that people can choose to opt into and pay for, and that would insure them against losses or something, but maybe that doesn't belong at the protocol layer. Yeah, don't be shy.
There's plenty of space. Well, I guess there's one, but anyone can come. I guess we're losing Lane. Well, my question was for Lane, so now I'm not sure exactly what to do. But, yeah, here we go. Here we go.
Oh, for me?
Yeah.
Okay. So something that I kind of think about as like a thought exercise in terms of layer 1 versus layer 2 and where the governance resides is, and this is a hypothetical for now, but I don't think it's always going to be a hypothetical, which is what happens when something occurs on the blockchain that regulatory authorities expect immediate action to resolve, and because of the lack of governance, it's very difficult to resolve. So an example would be some incredibly sensitive state secrets being put on the blockchain, not to make a value judgment about whether that's a good or a bad thing or whatever, but the results of what could happen in the real world, and sort of how that meshes with the attitudes and the sort of practical process of how governance actually does or doesn't happen. So that's something I do think about on sort of a regular basis as something that's eventually going to happen. And when it happens, if there hasn't been some development of governance, it could be pretty ugly in terms of what happens to real people in the real world.
Listening in on the last couple of core dev calls, hearing about I think they see. I don't know. It's just really I get torn. I'm torn on this a lot on the having things done more quickly or doing things more safely. And in the beginning of the dev call when they pushed the fork back and then someone had said, "Hey, maybe we could put in ProgPow." My initial reaction was, "Oh, that's kind of a cool idea." And then like 15 seconds, 30 seconds later, it's like, "Wait a second. We just had Robstein already have this thing and we're thinking about jumping into it." And I feel like there's a problem of not everyone can spend the same amount of time like committed to really understanding and really getting into the issues. And many people start on that train and get on the excited, and then they don't end up being just sitting in the issue long enough to get to the conclusion that get to another conclusion. Sort of, you just start running. That's been like an observation.
Well, to respond to your point about sensitive things in blockchains that require some sort of action, given, say, Bitcoin, where there is content on Bitcoin on the blockchain that like is questionable, nobody really has the expectation that it should be removed. And I feel like only when there's a possibility of that removable happening do people actively try to use that possibility and then have that content removed or censored somehow. So in that way, like if governance exists, then that will happen. Like governments will try to like get their government secrets taken off blockchain. But it's very much the case of like when it's out there in blockchain space, kind of. Would you disagree with that? Is it the case that like you can still be coerced to remove content, or
I remember reading one post of like Vitalik saying, of course, if someone had a gun to his head, he would make some kind of change. But then the community wouldn't accept it, right? As one kind of alternative to that. That even if someone was trying to remove something, it still wouldn't be removed. But it doesn't mean that there isn't real consequences for individuals. And it's like,
for me, if we're talking about Ethereum concretely, I think here is like there are some dilemmas and some things that we need to think about. So I think that the final goal of Ethereum is to build this basic layer that's like protocol, very stable, works, and of course is scalable and has all these technological, that this platform that's so that's the final goal. Okay, the problem is that we are not there yet. So right now and in the short run, I see more Ethereum as very much as a lab, or if you want, so it's more important right now to reach to improve the technology to arrive there that just being there. So in this path to go there, what needs to be what needs to be incentivate, what needs to be promoted is just to go as fast as we can. And going as fast as you can, maybe this is against having this decentralization or this stability and this thing. So this is a dilemma that in the short term, maybe we need more centralized structures to push faster to this final goal of a decentralized dilemma. And the other thing is that's the other problem in Ethereum right now is that, it's very easy to have a governance of something that's valueless or that has a low value. Okay, but when you have to manage something that's very valuable, you cannot be wrong in the decisions. So you need to be very prudent in the decisions you are taking. Okay, and this is the panorama. This is what we have right now. So it's like I think that in Ethereum we are clear where we want to go. We know that we need to be a little bit centralized in order to go fast to there. And in the same way, we also have something to protect that start having a lot of value, and this also stops or breaks the speed. The decisions needs to be much more prudent. So this is not an easy balance, but so far I think that we are not doing a bad job. Of course, with a lot of things needs to be fixed and a lot of things need to be done. But in general, I don't think that we are in the wrong way.
I think one question to ask is Ethereum governance slow? Is it stable, like people are saying? Because, for example, testnets, right? You still have some degree of decision making because you're coordinating between clients. You're coordinating at least between users of a client to like do version updates so your testnet can fork. That happens at a really fast rate compared to mainnet Ethereum or whatever, right? So yeah, we're doing kind of well right now on mainnet, but like if you look at the ecosystem as a whole, you have like new features being tested on testnets. You have things like Wasm already active on Kovan, for example.
It's a huge gap between testnet and mainnet, in the value that we are talking. So right now we are, in testnet it's very easy just to advance, but it's not enough value to protect. So I would like maybe other networks that are in the middle, that they are not like the main net, but are not also the testnet, that they take a lead, just proving this new advance in the technology.
But for example, with Giveth or Swarm City, you're using your testnets to transact with value, right?
But that's the exact point of I'm going to leave. That's the exact point of Ropsten versus, Kovan or something like that. Is that it is that in between? I mean, people mine Ropsten, right? And so it is this in between, just a POA testnet, and like we have those layers.
Yeah, but the problem of these testnets, a blockchain without a token with real value, it's not really a blockchain. Okay, it's not. It doesn't work. We can make it work, but with tricks. But we really need. So if Ropsten had a value in their token, maybe that could be a better testnet than a Ropsten without the value. But then it would not be a testnet. So that's the.
I think one indicator that Ropsten is doing what it's saying is people were upset when it was broken. If it was truly a valueless chain, then no one would have minded that it had gone. And there's like I feel there's a lot of tension between it would be easier if it was worthless, and I don't know how to make it. I don't know how to make it better than it is.
Well, you can use Rinkaby or Koban. It's more centralized. At the end, you need to take some balances in some way. But I don't think so. Ropsten is a testnet, and you cannot compare what's happening in testnet in what's happening in mainnet. It's like in testnet. If there is some people that's spending lots of money or not much money just mining that, they can do whatever they want. They just can do a 51% attack. They cannot mine transactions, reply transactions in different orders. They can do whatever they want. So it's not really. So I don't think it's. So it's useful for testing some technical things. It's very useful, of course. I'm not going against. I think Ropsten makes a good job on what's doing. But I'm just seeing that probably there is a gap. It's a huge gap between mainnet and testnet.
And the like Rikubi and Koban are also not really close enough to being mainnet to even sometimes be testing it fully because it isn't mineable and all those things. So I'm agreeing that there's like this big gap and we need finding a way to figure that out.
But yeah, for example, for me, one question: why Constantinople has not been approved first in Koban or in Rinkeby?
Well, on Kovan at least, the block number for Constantinople was after the Ropsten fork. So it's just a matter of we waited too long.
No, and I tell you why. And that's and maybe we go to the core of the place. Is Rinkeby and Koban are monoclient nets, so they are one is only Geth, the other is only parity. So for example, all the consensus problems that are in mainnet, they are not in there. So they are not really even good test nets for testing that. So yeah, but I would love just to have test nets first that are multi-client. I think that there is people that's working on that side for sure. Yeah, and that's and but also having I don't know. There are some networks like you know some Ethereum clones that have real value that maybe would be good to take a lead in testing these new improvements in both sides.
Problem with that is we're talking about governance, and the Ethereum community doesn't really have much of a say in Ethereum Classic or Expanse or Rootstock. So we can't really like say, hey, we want this upgrade, we want to see how it works, and go to the Rootstock devs or the Expanse devs and say, can you try it out first? It'll be like
I just like to plug a project we're working on. At ETH Berlin, we attempted to port over Aura into Geth to create a multi-client POA testnet. It was a lot of work, and we did not succeed in the task. And we're right now kind of assessing the situation and moving forward with kind of the opposite way around, implementing Clique into parity. And so we're trying to work on that right now. So I think there are definitely efforts to address the problems that you're raising, and they are huge problems. The fact that we don't have a single POA testnet. But as you mentioned, that still doesn't solve our problem of what went wrong with Ropsten. But I think like looking at how people responded to all of these problems, I think it's good that there was an issue. It's good that these things happen because we're learning from these things, and like yeah, it's incredible to see just little things like conversations with people talking about like having a plan for if next time this happens, we'll be already all on the same page in terms of what will happen if it doesn't work, right? Because it won't be shocking next time. So that excites me a lot, is seeing how we respond to that.
Yeah, absolutely agree on that. Yeah, I think that this event with Robson was very good for many things. For of course, for seeing the lack of test in some specific issues, seeing how the people react, seeing the lack of some tools for monitoring some stuff. And also there is one thing that's very important, is just training people to manage that situation too. So it was like the best test that we can do in being trained in training for bad things that can happen in mainnet. So I think for me I see it as an incredible good experience that will gives a lot of value to the Ethereum in general. This experience in the last weeks.
I like how nobody's denying that testnets and development processes like that are not part of the development governance process of Ethereum.
If I think it's part, because if depending what you think on Ethereum, okay, but if you think in Ethereum that in a project that's trying to improve the technology to reach the final goal of this universal network, that means that you don't need to think only in your mainnet. You need to think in what are the steps. You need to lead in what are the steps to go there. And the steps to go there is not deciding what's going in mainnet. The steps to go there is deciding also what kind of testnets you want to have, how you want to test that, who's developing, who's hiring the developers, what communication you are doing. And you have to take a lot of decisions that has nothing to do with with what EIP goes to the mainnet. That probably also, but it's a bigger picture. Okay, and the governance on that, I don't see that can be at least fully cannot go in the net. It cannot go in the on chain. All that you cannot put. Okay, let's see what developers are going to hire. No, but again, this is a short run. This is with a specific goal for a specific moment that at some point Ethereum should be like finalized and being the base for building other things on top of that.
But like that's why I think the governance is like perfect the way it is, in the sense that if you want to get involved in the conversation, like no one invited us to talk about testnets and say, hey, we'd love for
in terms of who does actually have the power and governance today, what their attitude is regarding how much power they actually do have, and the likelihood that they would ever give up that power.
Sorry, going back to the Ropsten issues, I'm on the security testing team, so I worked on fuzz testing for Byzantium last year. Last year, Byzantium had a smooth rollout, but there were actually a lot of consensus bugs that were undiscovered, which we found through fuzz testing. And I guess when, I didn't even consider at the most recent call where they said Constantinople won't be activated on the mainnet until January. I didn't consider that a delay because I always figured it would be closer to January than November. But I guess some people were upset because they heard on the call that all the tests were going to be done in a week, and so it should go live on the mainnet by the end of November, and would like reduce the issuance as soon as possible. I don't know if that was the motivation. But I mean, I had previously stated in the core devs channel that we still wanted to get the coverage-driven fuzz tester running. Probably, I mean, maybe there's like a 5% chance that there aren't any consensus bugs left, and the coverage-driven fuzzer will find more. But if anybody else wanted to volunteer to maintain the coverage-driven fuzzer, within the foundation there was like one guy who was doing it, and now he's too busy, so then it falls on other people, and everybody else is too busy. So going back to this, like I don't know if core devs are the gatekeepers, but there's a slogan from one of the co-creators of EWASM, Martin Beasy. He always said, be your own core dev. I think a lot of governance is less about like pointing the finger at, saying, this person is making a bad decision, or not preventing, whatever. And it's often the case that the better option is just not available. So, just to bring it back to Ropsten, we should have the coverage-driven fuzzer up and running before going live on the mainnet. But there's not a lot of people capable or with the time to get that running again.
And so, like, say we want to get involved, like our company, we do Ethereum stuff. Like how would that process look like? How would, you know, we potentially look at getting involved? And like one of our colleagues has the most simple PR ever, but one PR to Ethereum tests. So it's like it's definitely something we're interested in, but you know, how do we take that next step forward?
Just I want to give maybe my personal opinion as a dev, you know, because I think what this happened is most of the devs, if not all of the devs that do things in production, they receive pressure at some point in his life, just because, of course, there is a market pressure or whatever, investor pressure, whatever pressure that comes from outside, and you are a dev. I think and I'm talking from a dev, but I think the best way to manage that is so there is two decisions that needs to be taken. One is going to production, and this must be taken by the dev, because the dev is the one that knows the code, that has developed and has the confidence, and at the end is the one that takes the decision. And the other decision if the dev should be there or not. That maybe that's not belong to the dev. But if you are chosen, if you have if you have chosen a dev to be part of that, then you have to stick with him. So you either just take them out, that's one kind of decision, and the other decision is let's launch or not launch. So if the code, from the security perspective, if the code is not ready, and a dev says and has the power and have the obligation to say that the code is not ready, has a responsibility to say, if they're professional, they have to say when that's ready or not. And he's the one that really knows that. So this decision must be taken from the dev. And if the dev is not performing, then this is going to be from the management or from investors or whatever, from wherever it comes. But I think this is two decisions, and I think this applies very much also in the roster and stuff. So it's like the decision is okay. There was clearly it's not. There is no confidence. There is no trust in going mainnet. So the decision is great. And the other discussion we can talk if it's these devs are okay or not. But that's other decision. And it's another thing that has nothing to do if when it's going to be Robson, when it's going to be Constantinople happen or not. That's at least how. So just personal opinion on that.
Yeah, I guess back to your question about how to, encourage more developers to join and help. I mean, that's a challenge. So whatever ideas people have.
But make a call on that. I'm sure. You are saying that, which is great, okay? But here we are, 10 persons. I'm quite sure that the community, most of the people in the community, is not aware that the foundation is in the need of more resources in testing. That's something that I'm quite sure that this is not known. So I would say, just communicate that. Just put a post. Hey, we need more testers.
Like even as someone who listens to the core dev calls, like I heard like that was even an issue, and it's still kind of like where is that there is that barrier, or maybe even that feeling of like, again, like the emoji face, that's like maybe like we just wait to meet in person or something like that, but is that necessary? You know what I mean? Like, are there channels to kind of reach out?
So actually, there was an internal discussion about this a little bit. It was followed on because last year before Byzantium, Hudson had made a Reddit post saying we need help with Byzantium. I think even at that time it was still called Metropolis. I don't know. We need help with testing, and making this public announcement. It was like a couple of people ended up getting into the Gitter channel and asking questions, but it didn't lead to actual concrete contributions. So this year we've been trying to recruit a little bit with Gitcoin bounties as like leads to then find people to help out. But I don't know, sometimes the like public calls can be counterproductive, because then you just end up wasting time, trying to hold somebody's hand who's not going to work out in the end. So I don't know. I don't think there's a silver bullet, but
Okay, I'm just an example, but I have no idea how the testing is organized inside the foundation. I have no idea what are the internal process. I have no idea how it works. I'm just a single person. Maybe the rest of the community knows perfectly how it works, but it's not only about just saying we need tests, more tests. We need. Oh, we are explaining how the process works. What are the things that we are doing? How it's done? What are the challenges in testing? What are the new techniques in testing? The same way that we are doing, I think, an exceptional communication in, for example, how this Ethereum 2.0 is going to happen, or talking about some cool projects. Testing, it's also a cool project. It's also a cool thing. So it's explaining what are the challenges there, why it's so important, and why it's so interesting, and how we can improve, and how we can how we can be the chain that has the best test process in there. It's a technology. It's something that's a lot of research needs to be there, but done there, and a lot of effort needs to be done there. So it's not only about making a call. It's making a call, but also explaining what we're doing exactly the same way that you are doing that. So that we are doing in other technologies that we are investigating or we are advancing. No, the same way. No, I see. Last day was reading some kind of Merkle trees of whatever. No, that's cool. But is there any test research on there? Is there any article saying, okay, what we have improved on there? That's also part of the communications. But that's just a single suggestion.
Well, one thing that I would like to I just wanted to raise the awareness of how critical it should be testing. I mean, as Jordi was saying before, when you when you go for some developer, or same as when you go for some artist, if you hire some band to play in a festival, or if you hire some speaker to be in the summit, in the congress, in whatever, you go for this person with all of the implications. So I've always thought that a developer should be responsible of his own code or her own code, and that's why test-driven development should be kind of a core foundation of a critical technology, like the Ethereum virtual machine and the whole ecosystem. So maybe that's what governance of the actual foundation and the technology should kind of make a strong bet on this thing. Because otherwise, if we need to rely that developers will have some spare time to just leave what they're doing and focusing on testing, then that's going to be procrastinated forever. That's the tendency. That's the bias. All of us have many things to do every day, and we just say, okay, we'll just test this later. On the other way, if I know it's hard with very complex pieces of software like this, but if you first write your specifications and then make them pass, it feels good, and you don't have this kind of pressure. It's a mind-releasing thing. I don't know.
Sure, so everything could be test-driven development, but there'd be no way to ensure that the tests that are written achieve full coverage, because then different clients do things differently as well. Tying this back to governance, I would say, there's kind of there were some threads on Twitter that the Constantinople issue could have been prevented if every EIP written was required to also modify the yellow paper before being merged. And I don't think that really would have helped, because when client developers don't read the yellow paper anyway when they are implementing a feature. So Yeah, I'm not quite sure how this relates back to governance, but I mean, there, you can have like a suggested best practices and try to say, oh, people should do this and that before merging an EIP, but is that going to ensure a smooth rollout?
You brought up a good point. Actually, I think it was in refute, but it was the monitoring problem, which is inherent in many, many common pool resources. So incentivize monitoring would be my takeaway from that. Monitoring the test-driven development. I don't know the depths of test-driven development, but if you can incentivize overseers to go and have a look at it, you've got the monitoring that you wanted.
This was a really good discussion, guys. I have to call it, though. We have our next topic is transparency versus privacy. And it should be really, really good. So I'm just going to rearrange these chairs a little bit, and then we're going to make this happen. And there's some 4 really comfy seats back here. So if you're coming to watch the transparency versus privacy, these are secret awesome spots. You want in. Praise. No.
When it's not happening.
It's happening, but it's not for this event. It's for bounties. So unless you're doing a bounty or have a bounty. Okay. But
do I have time to go get a beer?
It's too late. We have to start. There will be beer, and I will get you a beer. But it's it's late. It's already. I'm already.
I was on time.
About
okay.
It.
I'm on time.
The beer is late.
Oh, it's like this?
Yes, it's going to be closed. Yes. Okay, so can you guys all just scoot your chairs up a little bit? So if you're sitting in a chair, just kind of scoot it forward. I'm going to bring it a little closer in, right? So this is an interesting format because you're not, all of you guys, this is called a fishbowl. And the reason it's a fishbowl is because you're not in the conversation. This isn't like a panel where the panel is talking to you. It's actually a conversation between 4 people here. But anytime that you want to take the dive, take a plunge, and dive into the fishbowl, there'll be a seat open. So if you want to come talk, then you can just take a seat. But if you don't, then you stay out of the fishbowl. If someone sits down, then someone who's already in the fishbowl hops out. They're free. They can go swim in the ocean and enjoy their lives. Yeah, perfect. Okay, but let's scoot these chairs up so there's standing room behind you guys, because this is a popular one. So if you can just kind of scoot up a little bit. Thank you so much. Okay. Yeah, this is a chair someone can sit in. No. Does anyone else want to talk transparency versus privacy? Oh, yeah, you're in.
We need someone in the fishbowl. Or do we just leave it open for now?
You leave one open for now, at least.
No, I think that you get to switch out.
Yes, yeah.
Well, I'll sit down. So let's get this show going. You want to start us off?
I do, yeah. So this session is going to be all about privacy versus transparency. I think when you think of those two things, they seem like they may not be able to exist at the same time. Blockchain is very much I think in its inception, it was supposed to be transparent. It's very easy to see transactions. You can trace histories. And yet there's this push for increased privacy on blockchain tech. And so I think that's what we're going to be talking about today. As Griff said, this is a format where you can jump in at any time and get involved. And there is actually a shiny seat available now. So if you have any thoughts or opinions, please get into it. And I do have some questions that maybe we can start up on. The most basic is transparency and privacy on either ends of a spectrum, or can they exist together?
I think you can have it all, of course, right? Both and. I mean, that's where Bitcoin is really cool. Pseudonymity, right? Pseudonymity, or whatever you call it. You can be transparent. You can see that this address that sent money here to there, but you don't necessarily know who that person is. So there's a little bit of a obscure, oh man, all these words. Yeah. Obfuscation. Yeah. So, but in the end, there are some applications where you don't want that privacy, and there are some applications where you do. I work with Giveth, and so we're focused on transparency. I really want the people who are donating to charities to be able to know exactly who they're donating to and what the money is going to be spent on. But other applications like voting, you really need some strong privacy. But in cases where you just want to know that, where you can have it all, where you can have some facets be transparent, but other parts be private. Why not?
And in the case of Giveth, from the donation perspective, you can be totally private and still be transparent on what's happening with your funds. I think is like a good example of them kind of both happening.
I think we have to define then, though, what is private, because you can be an address and like seemingly there's no name attached to it, but there are actual systems and technologies and groups that are, their whole mission is to be able to trace back where all of those funds come from. And I think they've been pretty effective. And this is the part where like blockchains are actually traceable. They are. So even though it might be like to the average user who just stumbles on there, they don't know who it comes from, if someone wanted to find out, they could. So is that really private?
Yeah, and to jive off of that, I think we think, oh yeah, you can do like taint, and there's like blockchain taint, this address is somehow associated with these other addresses, but it's way worse than that. We all use Etherscan, and our IP addresses are going to be pretty obviously connected to addresses that we look up on Etherscan. And so Etherscan has investors, the DCG, and like Barry Silbert, he knows what Ethereum addresses you have, because you go to Etherscan and you look up your address all the time, or you send a transaction, then you instantly go and click that link, right? We had a big push forward though with Block Scout, which is an open source blockchain explorer for Ethereum, and you can run it on your own server, and then you could actually go and see your own transactions without having to tell Barry and the Etherscan crew. So of course, no one does that, and no one's going to do that. And so it's like, how much effort do you have to put forth to actually be private here? It's insane. It's really insane, and the infrastructure isn't really built up for us to be able to do that yet.
Yeah, I think we don't have privacy by default right now. All of our infrastructure is compromising. Blockchains themselves are transparent, which is good or bad, depending on your use case. But there are systems where you have like encrypted transactions, right? You have to share a secret key to expose your audit trail, basically. And that lets you have both as well. That's one way of having both. So yeah.
Does anyone have any questions in the audience? Want to join us?
What a trick.
Gotcha.
I wasn't actually going to have a question. I was going to say that I think the definition of privacy is a lack of correlation between identifiers, so no context correlating identifiers. Then transparency is obviously the correlation of all those identifiers, and thus they are mutually exclusive in a kind of Taoistic balanced way. I don't really know where else.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree. So like the case, the currency case that is like always brought up here is something like Zcash, but the truth is the activities in shielded accounts are not transparent. They are intransparent. They are private. They are unseeable and untraceable. And so, yeah, I'm curious to see if we can really have both of those things. It seems to either be in a private space or be in a transparent space?
Well, I think that's the beauty of the choice, is that if we build privacy by design, then we can choose. Obviously, that doesn't mitigate against bad actors, but I think at the same time, producing radical transparency in this world right now would endanger a lot of people.
Well, like, yeah, just kind of commenting on what you're both saying. I don't really think that these two terms are too removed from one another, especially, like, I think the only reason we do kind of put them at these polar extremes is because of the stigma attached with something like privacy and transparency. We were kind of talking about this a little bit earlier. I personally believe if we build systems that are that protect users, that in and of itself has full abilities to be transparent, and if anything, that will make it more transparent by allowing users to choose whether they are kind of identified or not. Like, I think that, you know, it goes back to, like, what are we using these things for? Like, voting, for example, is a great example of something that must remain private, but the way in which we're doing that will have to be transparent, because we need to know that people aren't voting twice, right? So I think those two words are a lot closer than we give it credit.
In my mind, it's like not mutually exclusive at all, because the way I see it, I'll share the same definition of privacy that you did, but transparency would be auditability, right? And you can have data, you can have your information be auditable and still have it away from the public view until you want to reveal it, or until someone needs it or something like that. So can you have your personal information not be correlatable until you want it to be correlatable? Sure. So you can have privacy until you want it to be transparent. The question there is, can you get the privacy back, or like, can you do that in a trusted way so somebody else can't compromise your privacy?
I like what you said there, because the way I read that was like systems should be transparent and data should be private. It's like you should understand how things work and how things are being like the different metrics, and yet none of the data. That said, I feel like if you saw the system, if you knew the system and you saw decisions being made, you could probably infer from that certain data things. Questions, anybody? Oh. I think we're supposed to take the seat, aren't we?
Okay, so I agree with basically everything that have been said before, so I'm gonna go exactly the other way. I wanted to introduce, in the debate between privacy and transparency, the problem of how privacy could be unraveled step by step, because we are all talking about having the option, so maybe private by default, but having the option of being transparent. But if as soon as there's an incentive to actually reveal one's actions, it could and since especially most people don't pay that much attention and effort to their privacy, it could very soon happen that everybody starts revealing their actions. For example, I don't know, if it's for taxes, kind of the reverse of having some kind of advantage because one reveals her financial activity. And then, as soon as that happens and more and more people do it, if the majority starts doing it, then you can even start having doubts about the people that don't do it. And then it's kind of like it rolls down the road towards actually choosing to keep it private could become suspicious. And that's an argument that raises the question, like, do we need, is the thing we actually need something like green, where it's like basically impossible for that to happen, or like everything is private and there's nothing you can do about it? Or is there some way to prevent that by social norms, economic incentives? I don't know.
It makes me think about what really is the problem. Isn't a what, it's a who. And like theoretically, a lot of things could be more private than they are, but then practically, because of Etherscan and other things, it doesn't have as much. And so then it becomes more of a people problem than a technology problem, and I know less how we can actually solve that.
Is it really a technology problem, or is it a privacy by design problem? So it's an intent of the people who are creating the applications not to build that privacy layer or build that layer of security into it. So is it really a privacy by design problem? Somewhat like a security problem in the IoT world, where security is the second thought because it's hard.
So actually, just to go back to the question of like what's the main problem, for the example I introduced of like unraveling of privacy, imagine like something like Zcash, but private by default, where you have the option to reveal your financial transactions. If, for example, the government, because let's imagine like most people use that, or if everyone uses that now, but the government wants to have some kind of insight into what people are doing with their like finances, and if it maybe starts offering some very slight economic advantage to the people that actually share that. And the argument goes that most people are going to start doing it up until the point where the norm is to actually reveal the transactions despite the system being private by design. And so that the people that use the system as it was originally thought of actually become marginalized and kind of suspicious because they still do that.
I think that's probably more of an edge case. I think by far the majority of people are in, I forget who's said, I think Griff said about Etherscan, tracking your IP address to whatever addresses you're searching on the blockchain, and people are just flat out ignorant of the fact that that association is being made. And so they're giving away that information completely unknowingly. If they knew it, they might behave differently. They may say, well, I don't have any other way to look, so it's no different. But I think that that's probably the bigger issue right now. So I agree with what you're saying, but I think that when it comes to that's more farther down the road than right now.
I sort of disagree with you, because I think people do know that your privacy is being infringed on, and you do it anyway. Like GDPR came in, and all these websites like asked you for which kind of cookies you want, and now they're just kind of like, say yes, and you just sort of are like, well, do I care about LA Times? No. Do I care about this other article? Yes. And then you sort of go ahead with it. So that's a choice to give up that right on some level. And so I mean, yes, education is great for helping people to understand the risks that they're taking, but I still think people will, if they want something, they're going to go ahead with it.
I think, but it comes back to a design question, right? Because the reason why you just hit the accept button on the cookies is because it's a bloody pain in the ass to go through and say, if they even give you the options to filter and say yes, no. Many of them don't, right? So it's a pain in the ass. It's a design problem. They don't make it easy, and they don't really, So, yeah, I do the same.
But they're doing that on purpose. So it's just saying that like people's love of privacy only goes so far, it seems, and it's pretty easy to manipulate people out of their data. We've seen it over and over again. I don't know. I don't know why this time it's different.
I think I disagree with you when you said the choice bit, because think about the psychological reason why you're on Etherscan. You have a very small attention span. You're trying to figure out the transaction metadata. You're inspecting. You want to get to that answer, and there's a cookie. I don't want to read that whole thing. Yeah, it's complacency, right? But that design, it's by design. We are in this industry. We're struggling with user experience, user adoption, and I feel like and we're also in this industry where every line of code that you wrote has has this ethical implication. So it kind of comes back to this, privacy and transparency are very heavily on ethical implications. So when I go back to my point, how do you enforce, or how do you have a guideline of being transparent as an organization? Maybe an ethical framework, maybe as an ethical framework that you follow as a decentralized app or decentralized ecosystem, block explorer or something like that. There, it conforms to this X, Y, and Z points, and I think that's a good start to possibly kind of move in the direction that it's check, check, check. You don't have to worry about these things not tracking you by IP address, and I think that's where we have to probably set up some kind of ethical framework for these things before we go deep down.
There is a framework for the ethical OS. It is actually done by Silicon Valley for Silicon Valley. It's dopamine economy, surveillance state, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, I just want to make you aware of that and duck off again.
That was one of my reasons
but I don't believe it should be imposed. It does start with ourselves, and we have the capability to bring about that change if we educate ourselves on that kind of front.
Kind of just to continue on that conversation, I mean, one of the things that we've kept on talking about is that, like, I really don't believe these solutions are going to come from places like Europe, places like North America, places where people's lives don't depend on their privacy, because we really don't give a shit. And maybe in our context, we don't need to give a shit. And so, like you're saying, we have to build systems for ourselves in which the incentives are in line to get people to understand the value of their privacy, so that they can actually be, you know, aware that there is literal value to it. And as more projects like BAT and things like that try to literally give value to our privacy / data, you know, however you want to see that, you know, I don't think we're going to care. Like, until you can, you know, do a survey for 10 minutes and get some token, whatever, until that point, why would people care? But again, like, there are places in the world where people do really, really care about this stuff. And as you said, it's because their lives depend on it.
I don't think that the West is so excluded from that. It's maybe just certain groups. I mean, there are groups that are targeted or whatever. Like, there are data breaches. There are Secret Service agencies that are looking for things. Maybe if you're saying that it will be a community that needs privacy, it might also come out of, like, criminal activity. Who knows? Like, maybe that's where all of this gets developed. I think that maybe, so for the people who've just joined more recently, I don't know if you guys are getting this format, there's always a chair open. You can just come up and sit down if you want to. Say no. I was on what did I just say? I had, like, a whole line of thought there. Where does come terrorism or criminality? Oh yeah, private. So when you talk about privacy, often you have to, like, are you ever worried that actually criminal activity or something like terrible could happen in a hidden space?
But is that something that it's, like, our jobs to ensure that doesn't happen, or is it local jurisdictions' jobs to make sure that criminals don't operate within their jurisdictions? Like, I'm personally of the belief that it's not my job as a developer or someone who builds infrastructure for the world to actually even care about how it's used, because that's not my job. My job is to implement it. But it's not, no, it's not. I need to make sure that anyone can do anything with this, because if I'm limiting the capabilities of what people can do with this, then I'm taking away from how open and decentralized it can be. And again, like, I really do believe that this is up to local jurisdictions, local communities to come together and legislate the internet if that's what they feel like. But it's not blockchain that's any different than any of these other nefarious or potential tools.
So you're saying someone hires you to build a software that's actually, you know, will harm people? You're gonna do it?
No, for sure. I'm talking about specifically, like, open source things like Ethereum. Like, for example, there was a meetup in San Francisco where people were talking about, you know, layer 1 should be opt-in. And, you know, that really scares me, because if layer 1 is opt-in, then, you know, it is my job to make sure that we're burning addresses of cartels and stuff like that. But, like, that's the government's job. That's why they pretend to exist. So I'll let them, like, keep some of their jobs.
I find that to be very common among the developer community, this idea of just, like, pushing the responsibility to the government, which you hate and want to destroy. So, like, let's take that into account. But I just I find I think that I've heard recently that there is a conversation around developers taking legal responsibility for some of the outcomes of what they do. And in that, especially in the open source community, that is, I mean, it's a conversation. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying that is something that is being discussed. And a lawyer recently told me that is something that's being discussed, and that could be something that comes into effect, and you don't like it.
I I mean, like on our open source licenses, it says no warrants, no liabilities, and like that to me is what stems our ability to not actually care about not necessarily how people are using this stuff, but about why we're building these things. Like, and it's just about releasing stuff and letting the world kind of take these incredible things that people are building and then go from there. And I think the more and more that we restrict what it is that individuals are doing on a collective level, the more we're restricting how these local communities can take and build those things for themselves.
Yeah, but if you remember, we were also so excited 10, 15 years ago to push things out, you know, and stuff like that, and came to this point right now, right? And build the software that we were so excited about, right? And now we have like this fake news kind of thing. Someone can drop a bomb and then half of the population can die because of some stupid fake news. And we wanted to push the code out because we were so exciting and, you know, it was great stuff. You know what I mean? So the same awareness should be right now as well. And we shouldn't screw that up, right?
I agree with you, but also 15 years ago, I was 9 years old. And so, I mean, I think a lot of this software is being built by, but what I really feel what that means, and like the youth are leading this movement, and the youth are coming together. Like, people can always talk about, my grandma can't use this, and like maybe your grandma doesn't need to be her own bank, you know, and go back to times where she has her money in her mattress, right? Like, I don't know if that's good for my grandmother, and I don't know if she should think that that's good, but I definitely know that, like, yeah, we are here to fix this world, not me personally, not him personally, but us all together in our own way. And that's why I really think that we need to make this open for communities to implement these things in a grassroots and organic way. And anything that gets done on the layer one that restricts that, in my opinion, is stopping communities from being able to take advantage of this.
I just agree with you. That's different from 15 years ago, but I just want to say that nevertheless, be aware of everything, you know, nevertheless. But yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to like agree a little bit more, like put a little more input in here. I think that in general, especially open source software development should be amoral, right? Like the code, the ideas that I have and what people will do with them to what ends is none of my responsibility or business, right? These are ideas and you can take them and do whatever you want with them. Same thing even with closed source software, right? If you think about it, like heroin dealers and child porn peddlers can use Excel to keep track of their business and make it extremely more efficient, right? Is that Microsoft's problem? No. But it's kind of like the ends that they're used for. But that's not my problem.
It's a humanity problem. We're going to fix that as well, so no worries.
Go ahead. Oh, sorry.
I was around 15 years ago, so I wasn't 9, 15 years ago. I think I would agree with the gentleman's comment here about layer 0. Or layer 1. I would absolutely agree that putting that type of or thought into it is not the right place. Even if you look at the protocol stacks as they are in Web 2, that's not at that level. I would distinguish in an open source if it is at an application level versus a protocol, truly a protocol layer. At an application level, yes, I do think some of that thought needs to come into it. We haven't had that in the past, right? But the things we could do in the past were actually very, very different than we can do today. So some of the things that are going wrong today, like the weaponizing of news sites, are things that people wouldn't have imagined 10 years ago. We now know that that is a real and present issue, and it's not likely to go away. It's the same thing with, say, taking pieces of equipment that engineers designed with, you know, machine control systems that were 10, 15 years, 20 years old, and never thought about putting them on the internet, but now somebody's connected them and they're actually being hacked and they're being compromised and stuff. So some you can allow, but other stuff, no, you can't. We're smarter now, or we have more knowledge. We have a little more, I think, ideas as to where things are going. And saying, no, it's not my problem, that can't cut it anymore.
Oh, sorry. I just think that the biggest misinformation campaign in the world is that propaganda is something new. I really don't think the internet invented propaganda, and I think that it's something that we need to be really honest about, in that, like, we are not doing anything different now. Our class consciousness is not being determined by us in any larger of a way. Like, governments and media have always controlled us. 50 years ago they controlled us, 60 years ago they controlled us, and they will continue to control us until we actually create new systems.
So I was around 10 years ago and in university, and Mark Zuckerberg, like Facebook, once upon a time was super cool and innovative, and it was like hackery, and they just were super fast, and it was like all the things that you feel that we feel here was felt to a degree there. And you could see how it evolved into what it is, which is just they're trying to take some responsibility, but it's like that idea of just like pushing without conscience because you had to go fast and compete. That's what led to this.
Well, I think especially with the Facebook problem in general, you have to look at the way that they monetize the platform, right? Like, yeah, so like the reason that fake news has been able to propagate through platforms like Facebook and stuff like that is because they depend on advertised revenue, right? Like, depend on ads being put on and people seeing them and targeting specific demographics with certain information, quote unquote, right? So, I mean, we have an opportunity here, especially within the cryptocurrency space, to redefine how these business models work and hopefully take it away from, you know, a model that really you are the product and you are being sold to and you are being manipulated, away from that. But yeah, I mean, that's it.
So to try to segue back to the thing that I wanted to talk about 3 minutes ago, and that quite helps me get to my point, which was I very much feel that criminality is very much a incentives, not entirely, but very much an incentives problem, especially in the privacy and transparency spectrum. Like, why would you be doing criminal action if there wasn't some incentive to do it? And why would you be incentivized to why would privacy be associated with criminality if there wasn't an incentive to make criminal actions private? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's a really fair point. But I also think that there's so many other things that we are incentivized right now to make private. I just think that certain things are sexier than others. And like there are just so many stigmas when it comes to like we are the machine. And we're okay with that. And I just really don't believe that moving forward we're going to be okay with that. Like even things like universal basic income. Like, hey, let's break up the largest corporations in the world and just feed the world that money. I mean, like these are kind of not like we are able to now do things in a really crazy way, and like maybe it won't work. You know, this is all one big experiment. But I mean, we have to also be honest that like none of this is anything until we build it, and as such, we have lots of work to do.
I don't know if I would agree that criminality is only due to incentivization. I think there's, like, if you look at any society, there's the malicious actors for fun. I don't know, for kicks, for meme, fame, for... but now I forget what I was going to say. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I did say largely, but not like entirely. And I want to like go back to what you were saying about technology being amoral, not amoral, but like apathetic to morality. Would you really consider that to be the case? If technology can shape the way morality is expressed, if like it's made easier to act a certain way based on how your technology allows it. Well, both of you guys. Yeah, if technology like shapes the way your morality is expressed through its use, would you say technology is apathetic or amoral?
Yeah. Yeah, just to like go off of that, I don't think you can make technology that is like ignorant to morals, because technology always comes from a person, and I can't suddenly like put away my morals and put away my ethics when I'm writing code. Like, it's always there. Everything that I write is like imbued with like the thoughts that I have, with my morals and my passion, and it's like the same for everything that we develop. It's like you can't just like make that disappear. Yeah.
I want to bring this back to privacy. I was thinking that. I was like, we went into cool places, but I actually, so one of these, so I want to talk about like blockchain specifically. Do we think that, say you were really targeted, is there anything that we could really do in terms of the technology to protect ourselves? Is it actually possible to be private on blockchain ever, for real?
I think the answer is yeah. So, I mean, obviously we already talked about like the pseudonymity of, you know, like just public key addresses and stuff like that, right? I guess it depends on the level of privacy. I mean, but it depends on what I'm doing with that address, right? So if I just appear as some random public-private key generated pair and I want to sign messages and divulge whatever, I can just sign messages with that key pair and say all day long all types of things and remain completely private, and that's my free speech, right? No one would ever be able to link that back. I mean, maybe you can use some linguistics or something and like really do that, but like that's privacy. I mean, you also have technologies like ZK Snarks, all that stuff coming out that are going to enable that a little bit more. But yeah, I mean, once you get to the part where, as far as when I think about privacy versus transparency, I think that the value layers, like when we talk about tokens being transferred around and stuff like that, I'm fine with that being pseudonymous, but maybe realizing the utility of those tokens through different transactions, like actually realizing the utility of those should be more private. And they are. I mean, you see things like, you know, OTC, you know, like dark pools and stuff like that, where people are trading tokens around in private, and you really can't. Yeah, and I mean, like these huge liquidity pools where you don't really know what's going on, and it even makes it harder to, you know, track down the value and all that. But I think that there's definitely varying levels of privacy, and I think that you can remain completely private at some point, hopefully.
Just on the first point about the pseudonymous addresses, as I understand it, it's not like, it's actually still quite hard to be completely anonymous between addresses, because if someone's scanning the network, sniffing the network, a bit like Tor, if you're using a Tor browser, then you access a different site, your IP address can be matched against your connection to the Tor network. So I think in a similar way, you can have some associations if someone's watching at the network layer. No, the use of it. I mean, you can generate it, yeah, in private, but offline. But then going to, say, I guess other data encryption and decentralized storage. Oops. Yeah, just with the client I'm working with, there's just the idea around, yeah, decentralized storage as well. So needing to encrypt larger bits of data that can't fit on the blockchain, and then having a way of verifying some piece of that data to someone else. And again, that's where the ZK Snarks comes in. Yeah, I think I've forgotten the other points around that, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for the question of is it really possible to be private, I think we can all agree, like it boils down to like threat model, like who do we want to protect ourselves from? So from one extreme to the other, like, do we have any idea who Satoshi is? Like, I think he's pretty he or she or they are pretty private, so that's a good one. But on the other side, you have I don't know if you've read that, but James Lop. So he's like mainly involved like in Bitcoin, but he tried actually to go fully private in his life, and not even against a state actor, just like a tech-savvy person, like a good hacker that could try and like pursue him out. And he really has to set up like false corporations, multiple different addresses, to actually multiple also. I think he has multiple official documents just to kind of. To kind of trace down everything to shell corporations and false addresses. Otherwise, he knows he can be identified. And that's not even against the state actor. So you really have like it's a whole spectrum of possibilities.
I like the Satoshi example. So I don't know, I read this somewhere, but I think that if you look at, I think there is, as I understood, there is a government file, and I believe that the government, or government may have identified him through the way that he wrote, and compare that to other identities. Like, because there are some, huh? Oh, he's a government employee. Oh, or that. I would have to find it. But I think that there are. I think that what you describe is good. This range of, like, if you are a highly sophisticated government with access to everything, what is really private, versus if you're a company that wants tons of data about, like, a specific demographic, like, that's a very different level of access, I think. And I think on blockchain, I don't know. I think a lot of it's discoverable.
I mean, I think it's possible to envision a world where even like a state actor couldn't track what's happening if you really want to protect yourself. But today, that's like clearly not possible, and not just at that level, but as we said, against maybe a corporation with like enough funds to actually buy information, buy talented people to track you. But if we also kind of trying to look forward, if we develop like all those like peer-to-peer technologies, Tor being just and crypto today being just the beginning, using encryption, much more modern encryption schemes, especially zero-knowledge schemes, I think it's actually quite possible to envision something where, well, now today it doesn't work, but maybe one day we can make it happen.
I was sitting in the audience. I was just thinking a second ago, though, when I was spacing off, that I think we're debating the wrong thing. It's privacy, transparency, and trust. And the correlation is trust. Because if you're totally private, you probably shouldn't be trusted. If you're totally transparent, you're completely trustable, maybe. I don't want to go to those lengths, but you kind of get where I'm getting at.
Yeah, I mean, what's the purpose of being? Yeah, sorry. Of being like what do I want to say? Being 100% private. I mean, what's the point of that? Like, we gave up privacy like 15 years ago. Like, we hid behind some nicknames, and then we gave up on that. I mean, what he said, like the trust thing and the technology, what we're building right now is actually helping us get to the point where we don't have to worry about privacy. All right, because we are secure. We're protected by design of technology, but everything that runs, the whole systems and everything else, that are going to be built based on this technology. So we're getting there. It's like we're taking baby steps. We're super early stage. We may not even, I would say, live to that point when that. I'm saying I don't know, but it's, you know what I mean.
So I think, one of the ideas you can think about here too is, like, we keep talking about privacy in the context of an individual, but I think when you talk about adoption of this technology for enterprise, that's actually one of the biggest problems. Is, like, companies will never want to show their bottom line, expenses, like stuff that, or transaction history, like there's a lot of things that would be very problematic for companies to expose in any capacity to the outside world, to their competitors. And that is actually an example where it's almost like less emotional. It's less political. It's like, of course a company would need to keep certain things private, and then you start to play with, like, the fun technology that allows you to go in and out of that.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, that's okay if they keep some some stuff private. It's okay, unless it hurts me, or whatever damage makes it to me, or whatever. Like, I have to do with that, so it's okay. It's fine.
I was not planning to participate, but this is too exciting. So yeah, it is. No, I think the problem with privacy is that once you provide information, it's easy to create behavioral models, and once you have a behavioral model of a amount of people, you can manipulate. So decision making is like hindered in a way, and then in a way we are giving out like free will. Once you can really create a model of how people will behave, then you can lead that people to do something different than what they really believe, because you are like really incentivizing behaviors on them. And I think that's what basically a lot of companies and a lot of, I mean, this is, as he was saying, propaganda is old, but I think the technologies that we are like using today, like for example reinforcement learning or AI, are much more developed to the point that you can create incentives that lead to behaviors that we are not aware of. And privacy is something that if we lose that, we are much more easier to manipulate.
One thing you mentioned is so morality. So we gotta teach people for morality, right? So we start at the bottom line, and I believe that technology will actually lead to that point where the complete state of mind of people will change. The awareness of all the kind of things will lead to that, because we're using this technology. They will change the state of mind of people, and we will eventually come to that point, that you're saying right now about.
Only one thing. So yes, but I mean, there is always a debate about like morality, if it's innate or not. But I believe that morality is linked to cultural biases, and if you have a kind of long-term plan and you can like shape morality, you can change the way people think. So we are in a situation where, depending on how we set the following years, morality might change to the point that we don't care about like giving out privacy or not. And then, yeah, we are like, maybe we are already there in a way. I mean, if we just follow like the lead, and actually there is another thing with privacy that I think that, I mean, maybe it was discussed before, that is related to networks. And even if I don't want, and I'm very careful about like my information probably is leaking out through all the people I know, and then in a way keeping privacy is very, very hard because of this network effect. So I'm not sure if just like kind of changing the mindset in like, 10% of the population is enough to modify things.
We're all humans, so it affects us all as humans.
So like, again, not to sound too grim, but I mean, looking back at the fact that we are the machine that is making these people more money than organized religion ever did, and like that's really kind of how I see this. Like, this is nothing new. What they're doing to us, how they're controlling us, how they're manipulating our emotions. I mean, again, like since organized religion, since before that, like we've always done these things, and we've always been fooled into being told how to feel. And like, I really don't believe any of this is new, and that the only real potential change is going to be economic incentive to make people feel like there is a reason for them to own their own data, to actually be beholden to themselves, so that they can then sell this stuff and make money and survive a little bit easier. Because at the end of the day, I really don't think the internet invented propaganda. It invented like the manipulation of class consciousness on a global scale. It did none of these things that we talk about like every day in terms of fake news. The Bible is the biggest piece of fake news that ever existed, because it tells us a literal history that might or might not have happened.
Yeah, and I guess that's to try use an analogy perhaps on weapons, that war is as old as time. Weapons are as old as time. We've had different weapons, but now we're getting to the point where we can mass produce semi-automatic weapons, and then regulation comes in to say, actually, we're getting too powerful with this way of killing each other. Let's try to build some regulations around how we kill each other. Here's some codes in law. Here's what we should and shouldn't do. And also then the accessibility of those tools, and then who can create those tools. So are we at a point now maybe with the digital sense, and firstly I totally agree with you. I don't think there should be any rules about what we create. Now I'm just going to argue with my own thought there and think, hang on a sec, maybe we're at that point where, yes, propaganda isn't new, but the internet just allowed mass production of propaganda, and then fine-grained analytics and sort of classifiers allowed us to be very effective in manipulating minds that we weren't able to do before. Now, as you say, we can't separate ourselves from moral and thoughts, like we are a moral being writing the code. Like, and as much as I want to say I'm writing code that is just a smart contract that allows people to crowdfund, am I also creating a scamming tool? And it's a hard one. Like I'm still just debating with myself now, just trying to think about that on both sides. That we have the power to create something that could, is programmable money. It's mass production of those tools for other people to use in any which way, to use easily. We're often, I was at some other talk where we're encouraged to build these tools so that people can use them quite easily and get on board with our projects. But we can't control their motivations. And like any tool, I guess it can be used for good or for evil. So Cambridge Analytica probably had good intentions when it began, and it just took 1 or 2 bad projects, and then okay, yeah. So exactly that.
Somebody needs to jump off.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe. Do you want to? Oh.
So did you?
Yeah, I think it's really a question of the systemic bias that could be that is always embedded in any kind of technology you develop, and that's something you have to pay attention. Like the Facebook example, which kind of is the epitome of like fake news, is a really good one because there was excitement. It was supposed to be something new and liberating, but the way it was made had some systemic biases that led us to the situation we are today. Notably, for example, like how it was monetized, and also their decision like to just like sit back, monetize, and not touch the thing has also led to the current situation. So that's really like kind of the question that we have to ask about, like, okay, I'm building something new and I hope this is going to be different. So what are the systemic biases in what I'm doing, and are they different from what was done before if I hope for something else?
I'll politely disagree with regards to Cambridge Analytica. That right out of the chute, that's what they intended to do. If you any of the reporting, yeah. Well, the researcher, the one from St. Petersburg, I don't know, but there is other questions about the fact that it was going back to St. Petersburg. On Facebook, I think if you look at Zuckerberg and his history, even how Facebook came into existence with the screwing of the Winklevoss twins, I'm not sure that he's just showing he's showed these stripes consistently right from the beginning. I don't think he cares. It was around making a lot of money, right? I think personally that as application developers, we are all faced with that question, and there is an ethical issue around it. They use the laws in the U.S. specifically to say they were a platform to avoid regulation, and to say they weren't a news service. So they when they first started up, yes, they were just something new and small and stuff like that. But now that's not true anymore. And now they've tried to hide behind that, and it becomes less and less of a defensible position anymore.
I just still think that kind of in looking at the Facebook example, it's not our job to police what applications get built on our infrastructure, because then we're implicitly allowing our bias to be what kind of determines how we regulate these things. But if we just are explicitly aware of our privilege, of our perspective, of our different opinions, of our morals, then we're able to very, very effectively be honest about this and just say, hey, let's allow people to regulate it in their own way, and not kind of us sitting here talking.
Under normal circumstances, I would agree with you. But between Google and Facebook, they control 65% of the ad spend on the internet. So they're at a oligopoly, near monopoly status. So there was an article in the journal, I don't know, 8 weeks ago, about bail bondsmen. And I know that we're diverting off a topic a little bit here, but both Facebook and Google decided they would no longer carry advertising for bail bondsmen because they felt that it was immoral the way they ran their businesses. They used to advertise in the yellow pages, but they can destroy an industry.
Like, I just don't see our place as like we build TCP IP or whatever, like any of these things, like who are those people as those creators to say, hey, this open source technology can only use this way or that way? And also just linking this all back to transparency. I really do believe that, you know, like I'm not upset at Facebook or Google. I mean, they're doing what they're supposed to do. And like going even another level, we were talking about internet. Like we don't even own our internet. Why didn't any of us ICO satellites into space, you know, and build decentralized internet? Why are we ICOing all these preposterous things that literally make no sense when we actually could be building a future? Like the internet is not owned by Facebook and it's not owned by Google, but they own a bunch of patents on like hot air balloons and drones and all these things that they're going to bring internet to the world. And it's because we haven't found a way to work together collectively to bring internet to a lot of people. And so I think the second we start to actually use these tools, use what is the number one crowdsource, in my opinion, the number one kind of capital like raising tool that is for non-ideological ideological and or profit-driven things, in a sense that it doesn't matter about your jurisdiction. You just need to build these things. Like why haven't we built a new internet? Like there are billions of dollars being raised.
I was just going back to the idea about having a privacy coin or even some sort of like private blockchain. Like something should be private. So the idea that, you know, we should have a secret ballot. If I want to have an election, there needs to be some sort of way that I can vote securely and not be, you know, targeted the next election. Or
Paper.
It is paper, but then I want to do it in a way that I can't do ballot stuffing, or I want to be able to, you know, there is some way that we can build these things. And so the question is, should we be able to have private blockchains? And if we do, then we can do these illicit programs on it. But in my opinion, we should be able to build this technology to its full potential.
I mean, it's the exact same properties that enable, I don't know, maybe crime, but also these applications like voting and oppressed people in other countries to express themselves. It's the exact same properties. So it would really be a moral choice to say, okay, we don't need that kind of privacy because it can enable dangerous things. There's a balance between the two, but I think we also have to think about the kind of the biases, as I was telling, the incentives we built into these. For example, like in terms of data, because it's one of the biggest things. Lots of projects are very excited about monetizing personal data and giving back value to personal data. If you go back to the unraveling problem from earlier, that's basically a roadmap to people because people are not paying that much attention to their privacy. It's basically a roadmap for people to actually start just giving away their data everywhere. And what was supposed, for example, to bring value back to data and have people take back control of it can end up in basically just dispersing it even further.
Yeah, just relating to what you said about just like the need for privacy and like a completely private blockchain, just private technology in general. I think there's going to be a need for it until we have like complete freedom. Like I think the two are like very intertwined, and until like things with like crime right now are like very relative. Like what is a crime in one place is not a crime in another place, and until like we'll never come to agreement on that, so no one will ever truly be like free in that sense. So I think until we reach a point of just like complete like utopianism, basically, we will need privacy. Like, so we should continue to build these technologies to their fullest extent. We should create fully private blockchain. We should do these things no matter what the consequences are, even if it could be used for evil or whatever. You don't know if that, the law right now says, you don't know right now, like the law might say like, oh, it's okay, but you don't know it could turn on you the next day. And suddenly you're the one who needs the privacy, you know? So maybe it's like nice to build these things, just to have them.
Yeah, on that tip, so I'm wondering, like, do we think that the world, do we think that we can be more private or less private today than we could ever? Do we feel like we're the least private we've ever been, therefore a push back to some privacy, no matter how it comes, is worth it?
Yeah, I guess it's because because today our data is more accessible and more accessible by more people, then the need for the privacy is a lot more. So I guess I was thinking back to sort of the trying to remember my point now. Just on the still a touch jet lagged, but from Sydney. But it was based on sort of like if we're building something freely and we don't think of the implications of it, rather than us and our own morals think about what we're building it for and maybe having regulations a certain way, would it be one of those things that we have an informed sort of a voter audience to say those who are going to engage with it, they can sort of vote on what it should and shouldn't do? That could be another model that like maybe we say the data is private, but then a zero knowledge proof to make sure it's not child pornography then is something we'll choose to embed and say yes, by developing in this fork of these beliefs, we're going to say we don't want these things. But again, what's legal in one place isn't in another. They might have another fork that says selling of drugs is okay, so that'll be enabled. But But sorry if that's part of the question. But
About like building these tools and like this infrastructure, and how if we envision like kind of the end goal of that more private world from now on, and especially for most like for everyone, I think there's also like an interesting question about does that thing come from, I don't know, legal change, systemic change? Is that a technological question, or do we have to actually educate people? In which case, it's also a social question, and it's probably like everything at once, to be honest. But it's interesting to think about the balance of these different factors, and even if there are many possible ways towards that end goal. Like for example, if there is a way where we find some kind of like systemic incentive to lead people towards like much more privacy, and another way where we have like a massive social activism and education that leads people to actually care and take back control. And it's interesting to maybe think about which way we might be headed today with what we're building.
And damn, I just was on that point as well. Damn it. I'll let you take it.
I've been like this the whole day. Really, no worries. And I'm not jet lagged. I have no excuses. All right, so yeah, we steered off into a few different directions. I mean, what could we talk about? We could talk about privacy tech. We could talk about ZK snarks. We could talk about, I think super cool ring signatures. I can't remember the first. I couldn't hear the first part of your thing. What? Linkable ring signatures. I'll say it into the mic. What's linkable ring signatures? Can you explain how this relates to privacy?
So linkable ring signatures are one of the methods used for anonymity. Monero uses it, and they have like 3 different privacy features. One of them is linkable ring signatures. So basically, you're able to sign a transaction using a ring, which is a set of public keys instead of just one public key. And then you can only verify that one of the members of the set of public keys actually signed the transaction, but you don't know which one. So it gives you plausible deniability. So in Monero, this is used for just like obscuring where a transaction came from. They also have other layers for obscuring where it's going to and the value. So, yeah.
I've just seen with ZK snarks how it was used inside Zcash as well. Like, so the idea of zero knowledge proofs, I'm sure most people are aware of that. But I like sort of thinking of the applications of that and like what sort of user-facing products and what attributes of ZK snarks and ring signatures can help like towards applications. So. One of the examples I'm working on is people in the supply chain. They don't want to share data with others in the supply chain unless they're doing business with them. And even then, sometimes they only want to share the facts about them. So having something like zero knowledge proofs, or letting developers who aren't in the blockchain space know that there is this technology available that can do this for you in a trustless way is kind of cool. But yeah, I'm not sure what like with ring signatures, what sort of like say an application outside of money that could be used for.
I guess voting, basically anywhere you would want to hide who you are. So yeah, so example would be like voting. If you want to just like hide that you voted for someone, you would sign it as a set so people don't know it's you. Yeah, that's one of them. Yeah.
No, I'm just in for a sec. I was going to say that it's also used in identity to make sure that you don't correlate your claims. Because, well, then you've revealed your identity and you're no longer anonymous or private or whatever.
For the people who just joined, maybe you're wondering why we keep moving around. The seat is open to you if you have any ideas or anything you want to contribute. Just so you know. Do you guys have anything you want to talk about? No? No? I guess that's not very nice to just like point at someone and be like, public speaking for fun at 7 o'clock. All right. Do we have any other topics that we want to cover? Is there any other ideas people have they want to share? Okay, come, yeah. No, I'm taking it.
I'll be your host for this evening. I was just thinking, so I just learned about the theme, which is transparency and privacy, and I was wondering like if you guys had discussed like a big theme of this entire blockchain, all this conference is like basically markets-based approach to designing social systems. And I was wondering if there's like any proposals out there centered around defining those sort of access control rights, or however you might put it, towards data in terms of like a market-based system. So like if people really need your data, like for utility purposes, for example medical data, I don't know. Like if they really need it in a market-based approach, they could pay a high enough stake of money to buy it off all the participants. Or on the other exact opposite end of the spectrum, like what we're doing with energy data, I mean, most people don't really care about the energy data, except in the case when you go away for holidays and the lights are off, and then, well, then you get burglarized because you know when the lights are off. What do we think of that?
Yeah, I guess if it's if people are able to sell their data and it's not tied to them, then great. Yeah. I mean, I can immediately flip to some issue around that, around me just emulating, say, sensor usage in a house or something, or emulating energy consumption and then selling dummy data. Like I'm just scripting, here is a house, I'm going to mimic that and then add some random noise to it and then sell that data. That's just a challenge I often think about. But yeah, if for an individual, if they can sell it and not have it associated with them, then why not? And maybe again, it might be one of those sort of tick box things where you just click okay, accept cookies. Maybe, do you accept your data to be sold? Okay.
That's not actually what I'm like. What I'm really getting at here is like using the market as a mechanism, and this probably is a bit like far-fetched, but the market as a mechanism basically for violating people's privacy.
So I guess that'll be better than what we have now, which is it going into centralized entities and then they sell it at the price they can bid. Like so I would say that's an improvement.
At least it's explicit. I mean, at least it's explicit with this mechanism, but it's very transparent. This is kind of like radical markets allocation of data, yeah. With the taxation and stuff on who owns the data of someone else. Although there's a way to make like a market around data with individuals as well, without going the full like radical markets route. But some are gonna like have the argument that just having the ability to sell your data on the market gives it value, and also could help like people realize, well, that's actually important because I can actually get something from that. So maybe I should take a little bit more care. And especially once you implement the tools for people to be like, okay, I sold my data to like A, so A has access to my data for like a month. No, so maybe we do that with like private computation, for example, because it's a nice scenario. We're in a nice world, it's easy. And then we say, no, B doesn't have access, and C has access, but like for 2 years. Once you have that, it's also very easy to just have a system where people control their data, because you have the access control. So it's kind of like the market is kind of a special case of just people having more control over their data, actually.
And I guess if we're looking at building those tools, like building privacy tools and building data sharing tools, we can put our moral hat on and say, hey, here's a great application. This can help people sell their data and keep private and make the world a better place. But it can also then be misused quite badly. So again, like maybe no restrictions are better to tie it back to that.
Okay. Yeah. I think we are still like living in a world when we talk about data, we think of databases where there is some kind of data set that gets stored somewhere. But we are moving to a world where data is being used to train systems using machine learning, where after training, the data is not necessary anymore, but it forms part of the model, so it's kind of diffused. So things like DGPR or like laws that we are like kind of like setting up today are about like delete the data, do not use it anymore. But we are moving to a system where it's similar to what we do today with the data. If I show the data to someone, it doesn't matter if he remembers the data exactly, he can still remember the concept behind the data and make decisions out of that. And I think that we are still not conscious about that, and that will change. But if we still concentrate on databases and data access and things like that, and we are not conscious that data is actually information. It's not about the data, it's about the information you convey and you allow other people to have the real issue. And I think that there must be a transition, and we have to be conscious that it's not about data anymore, it's about information.
But still, wouldn't be like a scenario where people have control over their personal data, but they can also basically give it away for private computation. So people never see the data, but they get information because machine learning models are trained on it, and people actually get some value out of that. They get like financial compensation. If you want to go very far-fetched, kind of like data UBI, universal basic income based on that, wouldn't that be like an ideal situation? Even though like information leaks out, you still have all the privacy you need.
I mean, the problem is that once the information is provided and you have a learning system, you cannot delete that because it's diffused in the learning system. So it's like, forget all that. It cannot be done that way. So privacy is kind of gone. Maybe some aspects, like specific aspects, will be lost, but I think over time, I'm going back to what I was saying before, you can still create a behavioral model of like persons or entities of groups, and that cannot be taken away. It's like I tell you a story, you remember things.
All right, so I'm the last one. So I'm going to end this on a really deep philosophical note. If a tree falls in a forest and no one is there to hear it, does it really make a sound? And what I mean by that is data is created at the point at which you exchange it with someone else. So if you go to the hospital, right, and you sort of, you're not storing your data with the doctors, with the health system. You're not letting them violate your privacy. You're going with your keys and you're just saying, hey, I authorize you to look at this today for this time. I think it'd be interesting to frame it in terms of that, because that's how I see it. I don't see it as in, blockchain's just going to like replace this. It's more like, there's the new system, it's better than the old one, right? And so in terms of data, I imagine it's less companies having access to data and more us giving it to them in a way we choose.
I really like that idea that data is only created in that interaction, and that's something I'm definitely going to take away and think about. This sort of wraps up the session. I want to say thank you to everybody who came by. Maybe we can clap because there's a lot of us on this panel. Privacy, transparency, clearly more to talk about. Griff, maybe you want to, this is the closing session of the day, so.
Yeah, well, actually, we do have one more. Yeah, we have Gitcoin is going to present bounties and beer. Yeah. So if you guys want to work on GitHub bounties or have bounties that you want people to work on, then you can drink beer and hang out, and it's really fun. So Gitcoin's going to give a little presentation here. We ended a little bit early, so it might take them a few minutes to set up. But yeah, they'll be in here and they'll show a little demo of Gitcoin. It's super cool. They even offer to fund bounties as a way to get people to kickstart their system. So if you put bounties on Gitcoin, if you have a GitHub issue that you want funded, they have this awesome place called, it's like gitcoin.com/requests. And then they will fund your bounty. They will they will pay for people to work on your GitHub issue. It's fucking crazy and awesome. So you guys should definitely like hang out for a second and let them present it.
Can I say one more thing? Yeah. So I didn't introduce myself at all. Can I do a quick plug? So I have a podcast called Zero Knowledge. Some of you guys know about it, and that's kind of why I was hosting this. Yay! So if you haven't checked it out, please check it out. It's all right. I'm a Canadian. That's bragging in Canadian.
It's great. We all love Zero Knowledge. Come on. Yeah. Cool. So yeah, just hang out for a second. We're gonna rearrange the chairs so it's more presentation style, if that's cool with you guys. And yeah, and then we'll drink some beer and shit. Who? I haven't seen Kevin.